Hello guys, welcome to Hogwarts Tales. So in this video, we will see, what if Harry was raised by Acromanulas and found humanity again through Luna's kindness? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Child of Silk and Shadow. The forest floor was a world away, a distant, shadowed land of rot and damp earth that held no interest. Up here, in the moon-bleached canopy, was where life thrummed. The air was cool and thin, smelling of pine needles and the faint, metallic tang of old magic. For the boy, it was the only air he had ever truly breathed. He moved without sound, a fluid shadow flowing over branches as thick as a man's waist. His feet, hard, calloused and bare, found purchase on bark and slick moss with an instinct that defied gravity. He was a creature of this high domain, his skin mapped with old scars from territorial disputes and the faint, silvery sheen of woven spider silk that clung to him like a second skin. It was not clothing, not in the way a human would understand it. It was camouflage, armor, and a statement of belonging, all in one. To the vast, chittering colony that inhabited this sector of the Forbidden Forest, he was eighth son. To himself, he was simply him. A vibration shivered up through the soles of his feet, traveling the length of the great silver-gray web that connected this oak to its neighbor. It was a tremor of distress, sharp and frantic. Prey, large prey, but it was the scent on the wind that followed which put him on high alert, the musky, avian scent of a griffin, spiced with the hot iron of fresh blood. They were not welcome this deep. Their hunting grounds were the forest's edge, by decree of the colony's patriarch. This one was trespassing. He changed direction, his knuckles brushing the branch as he dropped into a low, four-pointed lope. The speed he generated was unnatural, a blur of dark hair and lean muscle that made the leaves tremble in his wake. He didn't think in words. His mind was a tapestry of sensation and intent. Threat, territory, drive it out. He found the griffin in a small clearing in the canopy, a place where a lightning strike had felled a giant. Moonlight flooded the space, illuminating the magnificent, terrible creature. Its eagle head was bent low over the carcass of a boar, feathers the color of tarnished bronze matted with gore. Its lion haunches were tense, tail lashing as it tore at the meat. It was young, but powerful, its talons leaving deep gouges in the wood. A threat to the hatchlings. A threat to the patrol routes. He watched from the shadows of a neighboring branch, 20 feet above. He was utterly still, his breathing shallow, his presence erased. He catalogued its movements, the rhythm of its feeding, the twitch of its powerful wings. He could kill it, a focused drop, a shard of magically hardened wood to the neck, and it would be over. But that was not the way. The patriarch, Aragog, had taught him that unnecessary killing was waste, disruption. The goal was not annihilation, but balance. The territory must be protected, the trespasser expelled. He gathered the magic inside him. It was not a thing of words or wands. It was a wellspring of raw, primal force that lived in his bones, an inheritance from a life he could not remember. It felt like the pressure before a storm, a building of silent energy in his chest. He focused his intent, not on the griffin itself, but on the air directly in front of its head. He gave the power a shape, a fist of pure, concussive force. He released it. There was no flash of light, no sound other than a dull whump that vibrated through the wood. The air in front of the griffin's face seemed to solidify and slam into it. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, startled sound, and staggered back, shaking its head as if it had flown into a stone wall. It had no visible wound, but its ears rang, its senses were scrambled. It looked around, eyes wide with confusion and sudden fear, searching for the source of the attack. It saw nothing but trees and shadows. The boy remained unseen, a silent phantom in the leaves. He gathered the power again, this time smaller, sharper. He let it fly, striking the branch just above the griffin's head. A shower of bark and splinters rained down on it. It was a clear, unmistakable message in the language of the wild. This place is claimed. You are not welcome here. The griffin got the message. With another panicked cry, it abandoned its kill. Its powerful wings beat the air, a whirlwind of displaced leaves and twigs, and it launched itself into the sky. fleeing back toward the forest's edge. Silence returned, broken only by the whisper of the wind. The boy dropped lightly into the clearing, landing in a crouch beside the boar. He took a moment, his head tilted, listening to the forest's myriad voices. The chittering of his brethren was a constant, comforting thrum beneath the surface of hearing. The rustle of smaller things. The distant hoot of an owl. All was as it should be. Balance was restored. He took his knife, a wickedly sharp shard of obsidian given to him by Aragog on his 10th summer, and expertly carved a haunch from the boar. It was a trophy, proof of the trespass, and proof of his success in defending their domain. He slung the heavy cut of meat over his shoulder, the warm blood soaking into the silk on his back, and began the long journey home, melting back into the woven highways of the canopy. Home was the heart of the colony, a vast, hollowed-out depression in the earth, shrouded by ancient weeping willows and connected by a webwork so dense it created a city of shimmering tunnels. The Great Web, they called it. It sagged from colossal branches, anchored to the forest floor, and glowed faintly in the moonlight. It was a fortress and a nursery, a larder and a throne room. Thousands of Acromanulas lived within its silken walls, a chittering, clicking, 8-legged society of hunters and weavers. He passed hulking guards, their multiple eyes glinting like black jewels in the gloom. They recognized him by his scent, boy and spider, inextricably mixed, and the unique, rhythmic gait of his 2-legged form. They offered soft, respectful clicks, a greeting for a high-ranking member of the hive. He was not their master, but he was their protector, their anomaly, their 8th son. Named for the 8 legs he lacked but compensated for with a strange and potent power. He descended into the heart of the nest, a cavernous space where the air was thick and warm, heavy with the scent of living silk and the deep, earthy smell of Aragog. The patriarch was immense, the size of a small elephant, his once black carapace now grayed and dull with extreme age. He lay upon a mound of the softest, whitest silk, his legs drawn in close. Of his 8 eyes, all were clouded with a milky, cataract's film. He was blind, and he was dying. The boy laid the boar haunch before him, a respectful offering. He did not speak with his mouth. He placed a hand on one of Aragog's tremendous, bristly legs, and projected his thoughts. It wasn't speech, but a stream of images and feelings. The griffin. The kill. The border is secure. Aragog's reply was not a sound, but a vibration that hummed through the boy's bones and resonated directly in his mind, a voice of ancient stone and deep earth. Less than you have done well, 8th son. Your strength is the colony's strength. Your eyes are my eyes. Greater than. The boy settled into a cross-legged position beside the ancient creature, his usual place. The thrumming thoughts of the patriarch were a comfort, a link to the only parent he had ever known. It had been Aragog who found him, a screaming, fleshy grub wrapped in a blanket, left to die at the roots of a tree nearly 16 years ago. Aragog, whose children were commanded to harm no human, had seen not a threat, but a helpless hatchling. He had taken the boy in, named him, and the colony, in their alien way, had raised him. Less than there is a shadow growing in the wood, greater than Aragog's thoughts continued, the thrumming tinged with a deep weariness. Less than a new sickness. It is not the iron men on their metal birds, nor the stampeding 4-leggers. It is a hunger. Greater than. The boy focused, requesting more. He felt a tremor of true fear from the ancient spider, a sensation that chilled him more than any winter wind. Less than a patrol of 10 hunters, led by your brother. 5th Claw, went missing 3 nights ago. They were scouting the northern ridge, where the trees grow strange and twisted. We found husks. Greater than. The image flooded the boy's mind, unbidden and horrifying. The desiccated carapace of an Acromanula, brittle and gray. All of its life, its essence, its very substance, had been drained away, leaving an empty, weightless shell. The same fate had befallen trees, doxies, even the soil itself. It was a void, a silence in the symphony of the forest. Less than it is an old hunger, 8th son. One my ancestors trapped in the deep earth when the world was young. Your return woke it. No, not you. The thing that marked you. The great evil that tried to unmake you as a hatchling. Its echo has given the hunger a way to taste the world again. My strength fades. I can no longer keep the seals whole. It is beginning to seep through. Greater than. The boy's hands clenched into fists. The concept of his own origin was a vague and distant story. Aragog had told him, a flash of green light, a screaming mother, a powerful evil. He had never understood it, not really. It was a myth from another world. But to hear that it was now poisoning his world, his home, that sparked a cold, protective fury in him. Less than be watchful, greater than Aragog concluded, his mental voice growing faint. Less than the silent hunger does not sleep. Greater than. The boy stayed with the patriarch for a long time, sharing the silence. His mind troubled by the images of the gray husks. He was a creature of patterns, of cause and effect. This was a disruption he did not understand, a threat he did not know how to fight. For the first time in his life, he felt the cold touch of true uncertainty. It was then that a new vibration disturbed the great web. It was faint, jarringly out of place. Not the heavy, deliberate tread of a centaur. Not the skittering of a lesser creature. It was light, erratic, and accompanied by a sound he had never heard before, a soft, off-key humming. His head snapped up. Every instinct screamed intruder. But this was different from the griffin. It was small, weak, and it was moving deeper into their territory, not along the edges. No human had come this far into the woods in living memory. They were creatures of paths and clearings, terrified of the deep shadows. He rose, his duty clear. He was a protector. He would investigate. He gave Aragog's leg a final, reassuring touch, "I will see," and climbed. Swift and silent, out of the nest. He moved through the web tunnels, his senses stretched to their absolute limit. The humming grew louder, a whimsical, wandering tune. And the scent, it was bizarre. Ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. The sweetness of oatcakes, and something else, something clean and strange, like moonbeams and parchment. He found standing in a glade not far from the main nest, a place where the trees were so thick that the moonlight struggled to pierce the gloom. She was a girl, slender and pale, with long, dirty blonde hair that tumbled down her back. She wore clothes of mismatched, bright colors that were laughably ill-suited for the forest, and a necklace of what looked like butterbeer corks. She was turning in a slow circle, her head tilted up. Her strangely protuberant eyes, wide and silvery in the dim light, scanning the canopy. "Heliopaths are said to leave a scent of burnt toast," she said to the air, her voice dreamy and distant. "But I'm not smelling any toast at all. Perhaps they're shy tonight." The boy watched her from the impenetrable darkness of a high branch. He was directly above her, a predator perfectly positioned for a strike. His mind raced, a whirlwind of instinct and assessment. Human, youngling, female, no weapon, no aggression. Her scent was non-threatening. Her posture was relaxed, open. She displayed none of the fear that all humans showed in the forest. She was an anomaly, a puzzle that did not fit any known pattern. She was a lamb that had wandered into a den of wolves, humming a little song. His instincts were at war. One, the ancient, ingrained predator, urged him to drop, to neutralize the intruder, to end the disruption. The other, the protector taught by Aragog, saw a lost, harmless hatchling. He remained frozen, his existence a secret held by the shadows. She stopped turning and her gaze seemed to lock onto the branch where he was hidden. He didn't flinch. It was impossible for her to see him. He was part of the darkness. "Hello," she called out, her voice still soft, laced with nothing but genuine curiosity. "Are you a grum-footed niffler? Daddy says they nest in hollowed-out branches and are terribly shy." He remained silent, his muscles coiled tight. How could she know he was there? It was impossible. No human had senses that keen. "It's all right if you are," she continued. Her tone conversational. "I won't tell the others where to find you. They'd only want to see if your feet really are grumbly." He felt a ripple of movement from the surrounding web lines. Others had sensed her now. His brethren. And their thoughts were not as conflicted as his. Their instincts were simpler, sharper. Prey, food, soft, easy. A large hunter, one he recognized as Carrick, dropped from a branch 50 feet away. Carrick was young, ambitious, and adhered to the old, pre-Aragog laws of the colony, that which enters the web, belongs to the web. He landed with a heavy thud, his 8 legs splayed. His multiple eyes fixed on the girl, his fist-sized chelicerae clicking with eager anticipation. The girl turned to look at Carrick. The spider was a monster of nightmare. 10 feet of bristling black hair and malevolent intelligence. A normal human would have been paralyzed by terror, their screams silenced by a heart that had simply stopped. The girl tilted her head. "Oh," she said, her voice full of a strange, airy wonder. "You're not a niffler at all. You're beautiful." Carrick paused. This reaction was as unexpected for him as it was for the boy. He took a hesitant step forward, his clicks becoming more aggressive. "Mine. I saw it first." Tender. Another hunter dropped down on the other side of the glade. Then another. They were hemming her in. The scent of bloodlust began to fill the air. A sharp, coppery tang that overrode the girl's strange perfume. This was the tipping point. Hatchling or intruder, he had to make a choice. And in that moment, he girl's utter lack of fear decided it for him. Fear was a trigger. It signaled prey. Its absence signaled something else. Something that deserved investigation, not consumption. Aragog's voice echoed. Ed in his mind. A new hunger is in the wood. To kill this strange, peaceful creature felt like feeding that hunger, not fighting it. He dropped. He didn't land with a thud like Carrick. He landed in absolute silence. His fall broken by a final, controlled swing from a strand of silk he'd attached to the branch above. He came down between the girl and Carrick, rising to his full height. He was not as large as the spider, but in the moon-dappled darkness, draped in shadow and silk, his presence was immense. The girl blinked, her wide, silvery eyes taking him in. She didn't scream. She didn't even flinch. She just looked at him. Her expression one of polite inquiry, as if he had just interrupted her in a library. He ignored her, his attention locked on Carrick. His gaze was flat, cold, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the look he gave the griffin, the gaze of a superior predator establishing dominance. He let out a low series of clicks from the back of his throat, a sound the girl had never heard, but the spiders understood perfectly. It was a language of command. "Mine. Stand down." Carrick's chelicere clicked back, a furious, defiant retort. "Number. It is prey. The old laws stand. You are soft like the patriarch. You forget what we are." He took a menacing step forward, trying to circle around the boy to get to the girl. The boy didn't move his feet. He simply shifted his weight, his eyes never leaving Carrick. He let the raw magic gather again, but this time he didn't project it. He let it coat his skin, a visible shimmer in the gloom, a low hum that made the hairs on Carrick's legs stand on end. It was a pure, undisguised display of power. He was reminding the hunter what he was, what he could do. He was the eighth son, the wielder of the invisible fist, the one who could kill from a distance. Carrick hesitated. He was strong, but he was not a fool. He had seen what the boy's power could do. He remembered the rogue crumple-horned snarkak that had threatened the nursery last season. And how the boy had simply stopped it, its charge halted as if it had run into a mountain, before it was driven away with a shattered horn. The boy made another sound, lower this time, a deep hiss that was pure threat. "Leave." Closing square bracket. The other spiders, sensing the shift in power, began to retreat, melting back into the shadows. They would not challenge the eighth son when his killing intent was so clearly displayed. Carrick held his ground for a moment longer, a battle of wills playing out in the charged silence of the glade. Then, with a final, frustrated click that spoke of wounded pride, he backed away, dissolving into the darkness of the trees. The glade was empty again, save for the boy and the girl. He slowly let the magical pressure recede, the shimmering aura fading from his skin. The tension bled out of him, replaced by a strange exhaustion. He had asserted his dominance, protected the hatchling. Now what? He turned to face her. She was still looking at him, her head cocked. The terror he had expected to see in her eyes was absent. In its place was an unnerving, serene curiosity. "They get very cross when they're hungry, don't they?" she said, her voice as calm as a still pond. "It's the Raxperts. They float in through your ears and make your brain go all fuzzy." He stared at her, not comprehending the words, but understanding the tone. It was gentle. There was no fear. He had just stood off a creature of nightmare to protect her, and she was talking about fuzzy brains. She took a small, hesitant step closer. He instinctively tensed, a low growl rumbling in his chest. She stopped immediately, holding up her hands in a gesture of peace. "My name is Luna," she said softly. "It's nice to meet you." He didn't respond. He didn't have the words. His language was clicks and hisses. The silent speech of the mind, and the brute force of action. She seemed to understand. She pointed to herself. Luna. Then she pointed to him, her brow furrowed in thought. You don't look like a Niffler. You're too quiet. He continued to watch her, his mind a maelstrom of confusion. This creature broke every rule of his world. She was weak but fearless. Intrusive but harmless. He felt a strange pull. A desire to understand this walking contradiction. It was the same feeling he got when he saw a new type of bioluminescent fungus, or a bird with a song he'd never heard before. Curiosity. She reached into a pocket of her colorful robes and pulled something out. It was a small, smooth, gray stone, worn almost perfectly round by water. She held it out to him on her open palm. Here, she said, it's for good dreams. It keeps the gulping plimpies away. He stared at the stone, then back at her face. A gift. Offerings were part of his world. The boar haunch for Aragog. A freshly killed rat for a favored mate. It was a sign of respect, of alliance. He slowly, cautiously, reached out his hand, a hand calloused, scarred, and stained with dirt and old blood, and plucked the stone from her soft, pale palm. It was cool and solid, a piece of a world of rivers and sun he did not know. He closed his fist around it. He looked into her wide, silvery eyes and gave a single, sharp nod. It was the most articulate thing he could say. I understand. I accept. She gave him a small, bright smile. I should go back, she said, as if they had just been having a casual chat. Daddy will worry I've been transfigured into a teapot again. It was an accident, but he's been jumpy ever since. She turned and began to walk away, back the way she came. After a few steps, she paused and looked back at him. I'll come back, she promised. If you like, I'll bring you a pudding. They say it helps with brain fuzziness. And with that, she was gone, her quiet humming once again, disturbing the leaves before it faded into the vast, breathing silence of the night. The boy stood alone in the moonlit glade, the hunter, the king of the canopy, the silent protector. He opened his hand and looked at the smooth, gray stone resting in his palm. It was a simple, worthless thing. A piece of rock, but it felt heavier than the boar haunch had. It was a message from another world, A.W. Earled of soft hands and strange words and girls who were not afraid of monsters. For the first time since Aragog had found him, Eighth Son felt a confusing, unsettling echo of a life he never knew, A.P. Ull toward the world beyond the shadow of the trees. He was a creature of silk and darkness, but he held a piece of the river and the sun in his hand, and he did not know what it meant. He was unsettled, he was intrigued, and he knew, with a certainty that vibrated deeper than any strand of the great web, that he wanted her to come back. Chapter 2. Whispers of a Different World. He waited. For full cycles of the moon rising and setting, he waited. The first night, it was a sharp, coiled tension in his gut, an instinct that scanned the forest edge for the flicker of unnatural color and the scent of oatcakes. The second night, the tension eased into a low thrum of anticipation, a strange disquiet that pulled his focus from his usual hunting patrols. By the third night, a new, unwelcome feeling had taken root, the cold, hollow ache of disappointment. He sat perched on the branch overlooking the glade where they had met, the smooth gray river stone cool in his palm. He turned it over and over, his thumb tracing its perfect, water-worn surface. A gift, a promise. I'll come back. He didn't understand promises, not in the human sense. In the colony, there was only intent and action. You intended to hunt, and you hunted. You intended to protect, and you protected. This concept of speaking an intent that might not happen was alien. It felt untidy, false. A low chitter came from a nearby web strand. It was one of his patrol guards, a mid-sized female named Whisker Leg. Her thought was a simple query, laced with concern for her leader. Less than distress, Eighth Son. The wind is clean. The borders are quiet. Greater than. He didn't answer with his mind. He didn't have a name for the feeling inside him. He simply clicked his tongue twice. All is well, a dismissal she was bound by hierarchy to obey. She retreated, leaving him to his solitary vigil. The disappointment was a sour taste in the back of his throat. He had been foolish to place weight on the words of a creature so soft and strange. She was human. She was flighty. She would not return. He closed his hand around the stone, the edges pressing into his palm, and prepared to melt back into the familiar darkness of his world. Then he smelled it: ozone, parchment, and sugar. A thick, baked sweetness that was utterly foreign to the damp air of the woods. His head snapped up, his senses flaring. He scanned the undergrowth, and there she was. A splash of bright yellow in a world of greens and browns, picking her way through the ferns with a clumsy grace that should have had her tangled in moments. She was humming the same wandering tune, and this time, she carried a small, covered basket. The hollow ache in his chest vanished, replaced by a fierce, possessive relief that was so strong it startled him. She had kept her promise. He dropped from the branch, landing in the same silent crouch as before, directly in her path. Luna stopped, her silvery eyes widening in recognition. A bright, genuine smile spread across her face. "Oh, good. I was worried I'd taken a wrong turn past the Snargaluff stump. They can be very misleading." She didn't seem the least bit startled by his sudden appearance. She walked forward and set the basket down between them. With a little flourish, she lifted the cloth. On a chipped porcelain plate sat a slice of something golden and glistening. A treacle tart. The sweet smell was almost overpowering. "Pudding," she announced proudly. For brain fuzziness, he stared at the offering. It was food. He understood food. He crouched, sniffing at the strange confection. His instincts gave him no warning. It wasn't poisoned. It wasn't trapped. He glanced up at her face. Her expression was open, expectant. He reached out a hesitant finger, touched the sticky surface, and then brought his finger to his tongue. An explosion of sensation. It was overwhelming. Sweetness, yes, but layered. A dark, smoky sweetness from the treacle, a buttery warmth from the crust, a hint of citrus. It was nothing like the raw, coppery taste of meat or the earthy flavor of edible fungi. It was a taste of another world, a world of fire and ovens and cultivated sugar. He made a low, guttural sound of surprise. Luna giggled, a sound like wind chimes. "It's good, isn't it? My father says it's the perfect antidote to a dreary Tuesday." He didn't know what a Tuesday was, but he understood. Good. He took the entire slice in his hand and devoured it in 3 large bites, the way he would a piece of roasted meat. The etiquette of it was lost on him, the experience was not. When he was done, he licked his fingers clean, his eyes never leaving her. "Good," he said. The word came out as a harsh rasp, unused vocal cords struggling with the shape of it. It was one of the few words he remembered from the distant before time. A sound shape Aragog had told him belonged to his first parents. Luna's smile softened. She pointed to the empty plate. "Sweet." She enunciated the word clearly. He tried to mimic it. "SS is wheat." "Yes," she encouraged, her eyes bright. "The pudding is sweet. You are not sweet. You are quiet." And so began their lessons. She kept her promise, returning every few nights, a strange and fearless beacon in the heart of his dark kingdom. She became a fixture in his patrols, a puzzle he felt compelled to study. Each visit, she brought a piece of her world. One night, it was a book filled with moving pictures of bizarre creatures. He couldn't read the words, but he watched, fascinated, as a tiny dragon on the page sneezed a puff of smoke. She would read to him, her dreamy voice weaving tales from the Quibbler about the auroral conspiracy and the hidden political machinations of the turban-dwelling gnomes of Zurich. The stories made no sense, a jumble of nonsensical concepts like politics and Zurich. But he found himself listening to the rhythm of her speech, the rise and fall of her voice. He began to pick out words, matching them to the few objects they shared. Moon, tree, stone. One evening, she pointed at herself. "Luna." He nodded. He knew that sound. Then she pointed at him. He was silent. He had a name, Eighth Son, but it was a thought, a rank, a concept. It was not a sound for a human mouth. He had no other. "Harry," she said, her voice soft but certain. He tilted his head. The sound was unfamiliar, yet it resonated somewhere deep inside him, a plucked string in a forgotten instrument. "I think that's your name," she explained, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "It feels right. It's a strong, round sort of name. Not pointy at all." She pointed at him again. "Harry." He looked at her, at the utter conviction in her silver eyes. He tried the sound himself. Har-ee-ee. It felt even stranger coming from his own mouth, a foreign noise. But she smiled so brightly when he said it that he felt the warmth of it in his chest. So he was Harry. It was a sound she had given him. He would keep it. In return for her gifts of words and sugar, he showed her his world. He didn't just tell her, he took her. He led her up into the canopy, showing her how to walk the broad web highways without slipping, his hand a steadying presence on her arm. He showed her the silent, shimmering patterns of the dew catchers in the early morning, webs woven to collect the purest water. He taught her to interpret the vibrations in the silk, the frantic tremor of a trapped bird, the heavy, deliberate thrum of a returning patrol, the joyful, chaotic buzzing of the colony at rest. The greatest gift he gave her was a glimpse into the heart of the great web. A place no outsider had ever seen and lived. He led her deep into the sagging city of silk, through tunnels that glowed with phosphorescent fungi he had cultivated, to the edge of the central nursery. The air was thick, warm, and pulsing with life. Before them lay a vast, bowl-shaped web, and nestled within it were thousands upon thousands of tiny, pearl-like egg sacs. Many had already hatched, the space was filled with a shimmering, moving carpet of spiderlings, each no bigger than her thumbnail. They swarmed and climbed over one another, a sea of infinitesimal life, their collective, and chittering a sound felt more than heard. Luna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. But it was a gasp of wonder, not horror. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the soft glow of the fungi. "Oh, Harry," she whispered, her voice full of reverence. "There, perfect." He watched her, his chest tight with a feeling he now recognized as pride. She saw what he saw. Not a nest of monsters, but a cradle of new life. She saw the beauty in his world, the order in its chaos. She reached out a slow, tentative hand, not to touch the spiderlings, but to gently trail her fingers along a thick support strand of the nursery web. "It's like a galaxy," she breathed, full of little stars. In that moment, standing together in the warm, pulsing heart of his home, the chasm between their two worlds seemed to shrink to nothing. He was the boy raised by spiders, and she was the girl who saw stars in them. Their bond was not one of stolen kisses in shadowed corners or flowery declarations. It was a shared silence in a sacred place, a soul-level recognition between two beings who had always existed on the periphery of their own kind. "Luna," he said, the name surer on his tongue now. He pointed to himself. "Harry." Then he gestured to the nursery, to the web, to the darkness that was his kingdom. "Home." She turned to him, her smile gentle and understanding. "Yes," she said, "home." But the peace of the our shared moments could not hold back the growing shadow in the woods. The silent hunger was becoming more aggressive. Patrols began finding the desiccated husks of creatures closer and closer to the colony's central territory. Twisted, gray-white patches appeared on the trees, sections of bark that crumbled to dust at the slightest touch. The very air in the northern sector felt thin and dead, usual thrum of life replaced by an unnerving stillness. The fear in the colony was a palpable thing, a frantic, high-pitched vibration that ran constantly through the great web. The younger hunters, led by Carrick, grew more agitated. Their clicks sharp and aggressive. They blamed the weakness of the dying Aragog. They blamed the strange new routines of their protector, his preoccupation with the soft-skinned outsider. The crisis came on a moonless night. A hunting party of 5, tasked with scouting a new eastern quadrant, returned in a panic. They were not carrying prey. They were carrying one of their own. Harry met them at the edge of the nest, drawn by the chaotic, terrified vibrations. They laid the body of the hunter, a spider named Sharp Leg, on the ground. He was not a husk. He was twitching, his legs jerking in unnatural rhythm. A sickly gray fungus mottled his carapace, and his 8 eyes, normally sharp and black, were filmed over with a milky, vacant white. A low, wet growl issued from his fanged maw, a sound no Acromanulas should ever make. Less than it has him, greater than the patrol leader's thoughts projected, laced with terror. Less than the hunger. It touched him. He turned on us, on his brothers. Greater than. Harry crouched, his own mind reeling. He had seen the aftermath, the empty shells. He had not seen the process. This was not just death. This was corruption, a violation. Sharp Leg was still in there, his life force being burned as fuel for the thing that controlled him. Suddenly, the corrupted spider spasmed. With a screech of tearing silk and a horrifyingly guttural roar, it launched itself not at Harry, but at the nearest member of its own patrol. It was a frenzy of mindless violence. There was no strategy, no hunter's cunning, just a torrent of gnashing fangs and flailing, sharpened legs. The other spiders fell back in horror and confusion. They could not fight their brother. It was anathema, a violation of the colony's deepest law. Harry did not hesitate. This was not sharp leg. This was a puppet, a disease that would spread. His face was a mask of cold granite. He moved with blinding speed, a blur of motion that put him directly in the corrupted spider's path. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't use his concussive magic. That was for driving things away. This was an infection that had to be purged. He sidestepped the creature's mad lunge, his hand shooting out to grip the joint of its foremost leg. He pivoted, using its own momentum against it, and with a sickening crack that echoed in the sudden silence, he wrenched the leg from its socket. The creature shrieked, a sound of both pain and alien rage, and tried to turn on him. But Harry was already moving, his other hand grabbing the carapace near its head. He poured a small, focused burst of his power directly into its neural cluster. Not a blast, a lance of pure, disruptive force. The corrupted spider went rigid. The milky film over its eyes seemed to clear for a split second, and in that moment, Harry felt a faint, fleeting projection from the dying mind of Sharp Leg. It was not a word, but a feeling. Gratitude. Release. Then the creature collapsed, its immense weight hitting the ground with a final, heavy thud. It was over. Silence. The assembled spiders stared, their multiple eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. Harry stood over the body of his fallen kinsman, his chest heaving. He felt sick. It was a necessary act, a mercy killing to prevent a plague, but it felt like murder. He had killed one of his own. The fragile order of the colony shattered. A wave of panicked chittering erupted, spreading through the great web like wildfire. This was a threat they had no defense against. Shaken, Harry made his way to the heart of the nest, to Aragog. He placed his hand on the Patriarch's L.E.G. and projected everything. The corrupted spider, the fight, the mercy kill, the colony's terror. Aragog's response was heavy, freighted with the sorrow of millennia. Less than it is as I feared. The hunger has learned. It no longer just consumes. It converts. It builds an army of the dead. Greater than the ancient spider's thoughts were weaker than ever, the vibrations faint. Less than for centuries, my ancestors and I held it in its stone prison with the magic of our blood, our life. But my blood thins. My life gutters like a fading candle. The seals weaken with every breath I take. It can taste its freedom. Greater than. The weight of the revelation was crushing. The fate of his entire world, his family, rested on the fading heartbeat of a dying old spider. He returned to the upper levels of the nest to find chaos brewing. Carrick stood on a prominent ledge, his voice a series of sharp, commanding clicks that incited the younger, more fearful hunters. Luna was there, having just arrived for her nightly visit, standing near the edge of the clearing, a small, pale flame in a gathering storm. Carrick saw her. His rage, fueled by fear, found a target. He pointed a sharp, bristly leg at her. There. His clicks resonated, sharp enough for even Luna to feel the aggression. The outsider. The soft skin. The sickness came when she did. Her strange sense, her foreign magic. She has weakened our protector, softened his spirit. She is the curse. A wave of assent rippled through the gathered crowd of hunters. They needed something to blame, something to attack. Carrick turned his attention to Harry. You bring this plague upon us with your sentiment. You have forgotten the law. You have forgotten who you are. I challenge you, eighth son. For the leadership, for the survival of the colony. The old ways will make us strong again. We will cleanse the web of this outsider and face the hunger as true predators. It was a formal challenge. Ritual combat for status and authority. To refuse was to forfeit all standing. Harry looked from Carrick's furious, hate-filled eyes to Luna's pale, worried face. He saw her flinch as the collective animosity of the spiders washed over her. His decision was instantaneous. He didn't give a formal acceptance. He simply dropped into a low, predatory stance, his eyes locking onto Carrick's. The clearing fell silent. The duel was on. Carrick lunged, a black torrent of claws and fangs. He was bigger than Harry. Stronger in terms of brute physical force. He expected to overwhelm him, to use his size to crush the boy. But Harry was not a brawler. He was a hunter. He moved like water, flowing around Carrick's furious assault. He dodged, he weaved, his bare feet making no sound on the web strands. He was a ghost, a flicker of shadow, always just outside the reach of Carrick's deadly appendages. He let the larger spider exhaust himself in clumsy, rage-filled lunges. He saw the frustration building in his rival, the fury making him sloppy. He saw the opening. As Carrick lunged again, Harry didn't dodge away. He moved in. He dropped low, sliding under the arch of the spider's body. His hands shot out, not with killing intent, but with tactical precision. He grabbed two of Carrick's legs on the same side and pulled, pouring his own strength into the motion. Simultaneously, he drove his shoulder hard into the spider's underside. It was a perfect, instinctual throw. Carrick, his balance shattered, was lifted from his feet and slammed onto his back, his legs flailing uselessly in the air. It was the most vulnerable position for an Acromantula. Before Carrick could right himself, Harry was on him. He didn't use his knife. He didn't use a killing blow. He placed one foot firmly on the joint of Carrick's primary right leg and pressed down. There was a sharp snap. Not a break, but a dislocation. A crippling, non-lethal injury. Then, with movements too fast to follow, he secreted a thick, binding strand of his own silk, a strand he had subconsciously reinforced with a trace of his magic, making it as strong as steel cable, and wrapped it around Carrick's fangs, binding his jaws shut. The fight was over. It had taken less than 10 seconds. Harry stood over his defeated rival, his chest rising and falling evenly. He had not killed him. He had disabled him. He had asserted his dominance, but preserved a valuable, if reckless, hunter for the colony. It was a concept he wouldn't have considered a month ago. A threat was a threat, to be neutralized permanently. But Luna's quiet presence had planted a new seed in his mind. The idea of mercy. The idea that strength wasn't just about the power to destroy, but the wisdom to preserve. He looked at the stunned crowd of hunters, his gaze sweeping over them, cold and absolute. Then he looked at Carrick, struggling uselessly in his bonds. "She helps," he said. The words a low growl, but clearer than any he had spoken before. He was forcing his thoughts into this clumsy, foreign medium. The hunger is the enemy, not her. He pointed a finger at Carrick. "You are blind." It was the most complex thought he had ever spoken aloud. Forged in the heat of conflict, it was a declaration. He turned and walked to Luna. The other spiders parted before him. A wave of submission and fear. He stood before her, the silent, dominant predator, his knuckles dripping with Carrick's black blood. She did not recoil. She looked at the defeated Carrick, then at Harry, and her silver eyes were filled with a profound sadness. "You're hurt," she whispered, though he had no visible wounds. She was talking about the sickness in his colony, the pain of fighting his own kind. She saw it all. "We have to get help," she said, her voice urgent but steady. "There are sicknesses like this in old books. Curses, blights. The library at my school, it has everything. And the headmaster, Professor Dumbledore, he is the most powerful wizard in the world. He fights dark things. He could help. He could know what this is. Hogwarts. Dumbledore." The words were just sounds, but the intent behind them was a lifeline. He looked from her earnest, hopeful face to the dark, groaning canopy of his home. He felt the fear of his brethren shivering through the web beneath his feet. He felt the encroaching stillness of the silent hunger. His world was dying. Aragog was dying. Staying here meant dying with them. Leaving was unthinkable. This was his home, his family, his identity. To step out from under the canopy was to step into a void, a world whose rules he did not know, a world that had discarded him as a hatchling. But he was the eighth son, the protector. His role was not to die with the colony, but to ensure its survival. He was its leader now, and a leader makes hard choices. He reached into the small pouch at his waist and his fingers closed around the smooth, cool river stone, a piece of her world, a promise. He looked at Luna, the strange, fearless girl who had brought him putting in words in a new, complicated way of seeing. She was offering another piece of her world. A chance. He made his decision. The predator, the protector, the king. Take me, Harry said. The words were perfectly clear. Unwavering. Final. Chapter 3. The Stone Nest. The border between the forest and the open grounds of the school was a line drawn in scent and sound. On one side was the familiar, living perfume of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the ever-present silken musk of his colony. On the other was a wall of alien smells, cut grass, open air, and the distant, confusing aroma of stone and thousands of tightly packed, warm-blooded creatures. Harry stood on the forest side of that line, a living shadow under the eaves of the last great oak, with Luna a pale, bright form beside him. The river stone she had given him was a solid weight in his pouch. A tether to this moment. He's coming, Luna said, her voice a soft hum against the morning quiet. She wasn't looking at anything in particular, simply sensing a change in the air. Harry sensed it too, a shift in the magical pressure of the world, like a large stone dropped into a still pond. A moment later, the air 100 feet away seemed to twist and fold in on itself, and a man appeared out of nothing. He was tall and ancient, with a silver beard so long it was tucked into his belt. He wore robes of a deep, star-flecked blue, and his eyes, the most powerful things Harry had ever seen, were a piercing, brilliant blue, twinkling behind half-moon spectacles. The man's magic was immense, a vast, calm ocean compared to Harry's own stormy, raw power. Harry's instincts, honed by years of assessing threats, didn't scream danger. They whispered apex predator. This was a creature at the very top of its own food chain, one that had no need for aggressive displays. Its power was simply a fact of its existence. The old man, who Luna had called Dumbledore, did not approach them. He stood his ground, his hands clasped peacefully before him, offering a small, serene smile. It was a gesture of respect, a recognition of territory. He was waiting to be invited closer. Harry appreciated that. Miss Lovegood, Dumbledore's voice was calm and kind, but carried easily across the distance. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Your message was most enlightening. Luna dipped her head in a little bow. Harry needs to use the library, Professor. His home is sick. Dumbledore's bright blue eyes shifted to Harry. The gaze was not one of pity, or of awe at finding the long-lost boy who lived. It was the keen, analytical gaze of a scholar discovering a new and magnificent species. There was respect in it, and a deep, profound curiosity. Harry, Dumbledore said, tasting the name. It is a privilege to finally meet you. Harry said nothing. He watched the man's posture. The subtle shift of his weight, the way his magic settled around him like a cloak. He was assessing, learning. He gave a short, sharp nod, acknowledging the greeting. Luna has explained the situation in the forest. Dumbledore continued, his tone growing more serious. A blight that consumes and converts. I have seen such things before, in darker times. They do not arise on their own. Your request for knowledge is wise. Hogwarts will grant it. He paused, his eyes twinkling again. In exchange, I would ask for the same. Harry tilted his head. A negotiation. This, he understood. The exchange of goods, of services. He placed a hand on his chest, then gestured to Dumbledore. I give, you give. Dumbledore's smile widened. He understood perfectly. Indeed, you will come to Hogwarts not merely as a student, but as an emissary from a kingdom we have long and foolishly ignored. You will have access to our knowledge. In return, you will grant me access to yours. We will learn from each other, Harry. For I believe we face a common enemy. This was an alliance, a pact between two powers. This was a language Harry knew better than any spoken word. He met the old man's gaze, and for the first time, spoke to him directly. His voice was a rasp, rough from disuse, but the word was firm. Yes, the journey to the castle was a sensory assault. As they crossed the invisible border from the forest's edge, the world erupted. The sheer, oppressive openness of the sky made the instincts in his spine scream for the cover of the canopy. The sounds were a chaotic avalanche, the distant shouts of other students. The screech of a strange bird he later learned was an owl, the relentless rustle of the wind with no leaves to soften it. But the castle itself was the true nightmare. As they passed through the colossal oak doors into the entrance hall, the noise became a physical blow. Hundreds of voices, all chattering in the meaningless human fashion, echoed and bounced off the high stone ceiling, creating a disorienting cacophony. Smells warred in the air. The cloying sweetness of perfume, the greasy tang of cooked meat, the sharp scent of potions' ingredients, the musty odor of ancient stone and tapestry. And underneath it all, the overwhelming, animal smell of 1,000 humans packed into one space. Harry's senses, designed to pick out the snap of a single twig from 100 yards, were overloaded. He felt a primal urge to flee, to climb the high stone walls, to find a dark, quiet corner away from the crushing sensory input. He stuck close to Luna, a fixed point in the swirling chaos. His hand hovering near the hilt of his obsidian knife. His posture was coiled, every muscle ready to spring. The students they passed fell silent, staring at him. At the strange, woven silk armor that clung to his skin. At his bare, dirt-stained feet, at the wild, untamed mass of his black hair, and at the flat, predatory stillness of his eyes. "They're just curious," Luna whispered, her voice a calming anchor. "They've never seen anyone from the forest before." To Harry, their stares felt like the collective gaze of a predator pack assessing a strange new animal in their territory. He didn't see curiosity, he saw teeth. Dumbledore led them into the great hall. It was even worse. 4 long tables crammed with hundreds of chattering students. A ceiling that mimicked the open, exposed sky. And thousands of floating candles that pulsed with a hot, aggressive light. Harry's instinct was to find the highest point, so he could observe the whole herd. His eyes scanned the rafters, calculating trajectories. "We have a unique arrival this evening," Dumbledore announced, his voice magically amplified to fill the hall. A hush fell. 1,000 pairs of eyes turned to fix on Harry. He felt like a beetle pinned to a board. "This is Harry Potter," Dumbledore said simply. The name sent a wave of whispers through the hall. Potter. The Harry Potter. But, look at him. Harry ignored the whispers. He didn't understand their meaning. The sounds were just more noise. His focus was on the immediate environment, the potential threats. Due to exceptional circumstances in his upbringing, Dumbledore continued with masterful understatement, he has only just joined us. He will require our patience, our understanding, and our respect. First, he must be sorted. An old, frayed Wizza. Rhodes' hat was brought forth and placed on a stool. Dumbledore beckoned him forward. Harry looked at the hat, then at Luna, who gave him an encouraging nod. He moved with his silent, fluid grace, a ray of shadow in a hall of blinding light. He sat on the stool, rigid and wary. Professor McGonagall, a stern-looking witch with a severe bun, lowered the hat onto his head. The moment the brim touched his hair, his mind was invaded. "Less than well now, what have we here?" Greater than a voice echoed directly inside his skull, a violation that made him recoil. He struck back instinctively. He didn't mean to, but his mind, his very consciousness, was his own sacred territory. He couldn't allow an intruder. He slammed a mental door, a barrier built of forest echoes, spider thoughts, and the raw, silent hum of his own magic. The voice in his head yelped in surprise. "Less than mercy me, what was? By the founders, your mind, it isn't a single room. It's a web, a forest. I feel others, 1,000, 10,000 others. A hive, but you are alone. A king with the thoughts of a colony, how can one be both singular and legion? There's no category, no box for this. It's all instinct and shadow and hunger, and a fierce, ending light of protection. It doesn't fit. It doesn't. Greater than." The hat went rigid on his head. A psychic scream of pure, unadulterated confusion and pain jolted through Harry's skull. He gritted his teeth, his hands clenching into fists as he fought the disorienting mental feedback. On the outside, the hat simply fell silent. It sat there, limp and unmoving, for a full minute. The hall held its breath. Dumbledore's eyes narrowed behind his spectacles. He saw the tension in Harry's jaw, the rigidity of the ancient hat. He stepped forward. "It appears," he said, his voice calm but decisive, "that Mr. Potter's unique mind defies our conventional methods of assessment." He gently lifted the hat from Harry's head. The moment it was removed, Harry could breathe again, the mental chaos receding. He read at the inanimate object with pure animosity. "The purpose of the sorting is to find a home, a family within these walls," Dumbledore announced to the bewildered students. "When the path is unclear, sometimes the heart knows the way best. Harry, you shall choose." He gestured to the 4 tables. 1,000 faces stared at him. Gryffindor, a sea of red and gold, looked boisterous, challenging. Slytherin, green and silver, watched him with cold, calculating eyes, like snakes assessing a mongoose. Hufflepuff, yellow and black, seemed nervous but kind. Then his eyes found Ravenclaw. He saw Luna, sitting at the table of blue and bronze. She wasn't staring like the others. She was simply looking at him, a small, encouraging smile on her face. His anchor, his guide, the one who spoke a language he was beginning to understand. Without hesitation, he pointed. A wave of murmurs broke out. Dumbledore beamed. So be it. Let our new Ravenclaw be welcomed. The Ravenclaw table offered a polite, if somewhat stunned, round of applause. Harry walked to the table, ignoring the stares, and sat beside Luna. The solid wood of the bench beneath him was a small comfort. He took the river stone from H.'s pouch and held it in his hand under the table, its familiar smoothness a silent reassurance. The chaos had a center now. Her name was Luna. His first class the next day was Charms with the diminutive Professor Flitwick. The classroom was bright and noisy. Harry chose a seat at the back, near the window, feeling the walls pressing in on him. Luna sat beside him, humming quietly. Now then, everyone, Flitwick squeaked from atop a pile of books. Today, we are perfecting the levitation charm. Wingardium Leviosa, a simple swish and flick. You all have your feathers. Harry stared at the fluffy white feather on his desk. He had no wand. Dumbledore had said he would have one fashioned for him, one that could handle his unique magic, but for now, he was bare-handed. Mr. Potter, Flitwick chirped, noticing his lack of equipment. Ah, yes, the headmaster informed me. Do not worry, the intent is the core of all magic. Simply focus on the feather. Feel its lightness. Will it to rise? Harry looked at the feather. He didn't understand lightness. He understood up. He focused his intent, the same way he had with the griffin. He pictured the feather leaving the desk and going to the ceiling. He gathered the storm in his chest. A tiny spark of it, and pushed. Whump. A sound like a muffled thunderclap cracked through the classroom. The feather didn't float. It didn't levitate. It shot from the desk like a bullet. A white streak against the air, and slammed into the high, vaulted ceiling with enough force to embed itself half an inch deep into the ancient oak beam. It quivered there, a testament to raw, untamed power. The classroom fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Every student stared, wide-eyed, from the vibrating feather in the ceiling to the strange, silent boy at the back of the room. Professor Flitwick had to push his glasses back up his nose. He stared at the feather, then at Harry, his tiny jaw slack with astonishment. Then, a slow, academic smile spread across his face. Remarkable, he whispered, his voice full of awe. Absolutely remarkable. The pure, kinetic force, without a somatic component, Mr. Potter, we have much to discuss. Harry just blinked, confused by the reaction. The feather went up. That was the goal. Why was everyone staring? The stares followed him all day. In the corridors, students would fall silent and press themselves against the walls as he passed. He ignored them, his senses on high alert, his movements a fluid, predatory glide that was deeply unsettling to a world of clumsy, shuffling teenagers. It was after potions that the first direct challenge came. He was walking with Luna through a less crowded corridor when a trio of boys in green-trimmed Slytherin robes blocked their path. The one in the lead was pale and sharp-featured, with slicked-back white blonde hair and a sneer that seemed permanently etched onto his face. Well, the boy, Draco Malfoy, drawled, his eyes raking over Harry with undisguised contempt. Look what crawled out of the forest. I'm surprised they let you in the castle, creature. Did you learn to beg? His 2 hulking cronies, Crabbe and Goyle, snickered stupidly. Luna frowned. That's not very nice, Draco. His name is Harry. I don't care what it calls itself, Malfoy spat, taking a step closer. He was trying to be intimidating, puffing out his chest. It's filth. A half-breed animal that doesn't belong here. My father says the ministry should have had it put down years ago. Harry didn't understand all the words. Filth, creature, put down. But the tone, the aggressive posture, the sneering expression, that was a universal language. It was a challenge, a display for status. Just like Carrick, He didn't rise to the bait. He didn't speak. He didn't reach for his knife. He simply stopped, and his entire demeanor shifted. The restless energy, the constant scanning of his surroundings, all of it ceased. He became absolutely, preternaturally still. He turned his head slowly, and his green eyes, which had been wide and taking everything in, narrowed slightly. The focus in them sharpened to a razor's edge. He wasn't looking at Malfoy. He was looking through him, cataloging him, assessing him not as a rival, but as prey. His breathing became silent. His body was a coiled spring, but the stillness was what was so terrifying. It was the absolute, patient stillness of a spider waiting for a fly to touch its web. The air grew thick and cold around them. Malfoy's sneer faltered. He had expected a reaction, a stupid grunt, a clumsy swing, something he could mock. He had not expected this. This utter, silent, predatory focus. He felt a primal, gut-twisting lurch in his stomach, the instinct of 1,000 generations of prey animals screaming at him that he had just corn. Something he should have left alone. His mouth went dry. Crabbe and Goyle, who operated on an even more basic level of instinct, actually took a step back, their dumb expressions replaced by ones of genuine fear. Harry held the gaze for 3 long, silent heartbeats. He saw the flicker of panic in Malfoy's gray eyes, the slight tremble in his hand as it hovered near his wand pocket. He had established dominance. No violence was necessary. He broke the stillness as suddenly as he had entered it. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a gesture of dismissal. Then he simply stepped around the frozen trio, his shoulder brushing Malfoy's, and continued down the corridor, his pace unhurried. Luna followed, casting a final, sad look at the pale-faced bully. His brain must be exceptionally fuzzy, she commented quietly to Harry as they walked away. Harry didn't reply. He had won the confrontation, but the feeling of victory was hollow. The constant challenges, the noise, the smells, the oppressive stone, it was all building up, a pressure cooker of sensory data with no release valve. He felt scraped raw, exposed. That night, he couldn't bear it. The shared dormitory of Ravenclaw Tower, with its 4 other boys breathing and turning in their sleep, was a cage. The stone walls felt like a tomb. He needed height. He needed darkness. He needed air that didn't smell of soap and snoring boys. He slipped from his bed, a ghost in the moonlight filtering through the high-arched window. The common room was empty. He found the exit and moved through the sleeping castle, his bare feet making no sound on the cold stone floors. He avoided the roving ghosts, strange, cold echoes of life that made the hairs on his arms stand up, and the portraits of sleeping figures with an instinct he didn't know he had. He didn't stop until he was outside, the cool night air a balm on his skin. But the open grounds were wrong. He needed to be up. He found a familiar shape against the starlit sky, a great, ancient oak. One that stood alone near the edge of the forbidden forest. He scaled it in seconds, his hands and feet finding holds in the bark with practiced ease. He settled on a high, thick branch that gave him a clear view of the entire castle. The stone nest. It glowed with a warm, alien light, a mountain of human activity, but from up here, it was silent. He could also see the dark, familiar line of his own world, the canopy of the forbidden forest, a jagged silhouette against the stars. He sat there, perched like a great, dark bird, and felt utterly, completely alone. He was no longer the 8th son, master of his domain. He was not a student, a boy among boys. He was a creature caught between 2 worlds, a king in exile from one and an outcast in the other. He belonged nowhere. The feeling was a cold, heavy stone in his chest, heavier than any he had ever carried. He heard a faint rustle on the branch below him. He tensed, his body instantly ready for a threat. The castle is very loud, isn't it? Quote. It was Luna. She had followed him. She was sitting on a lower branch, her bare feet dangling in the air, her white nightgown making her look like a lost moonbeam. She wasn't looking at him, but out at the castle. All the stone holds the echoes, she said dreamily. All the old arguments and all the forgotten secrets. It's hard to find a quiet corner. Harry didn't speak. He just watched her, the tension slowly bleeding out of him. She hadn't come to fetch him, to scold him, to tell him to go back inside. She had simply come to be with him. She didn't say another word. She just sat there on her branch, occasionally humming her little tune, sharing the vast, silent darkness. She was a bridge, not just from the forest to the castle, but from his cruise. In isolation to a single point of connection. She didn't try to pull him into her world or push him back to his. She simply sat with him, right there on the line between. He looked from the glowing stone nest to the dark silk nest. Then to the pale, quiet girl on the branch below. For the first time, he felt the true, terrifying scale of what he had done. He had left his home to save it, and in doing so, he had marooned himself on an island in the sky, with only one other inhabitant. And he was terrified she was the only thing keeping him from falling. Chapter 4. Lessons in Flesh and Magic. He headmaster's office was another assault on the senses, but of a different kind. Where the great hall was chaotic, this room was cluttered with a dense, almost suffocating history. Whirring silver instruments spun on spindly tables. Their purpose a mystery. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women who watched his every move, their painted eyes tracking him with open suspicion. And the air was thick with the scent of old parchment, lemon drops, and a powerful, ancient magic that seemed to seep from the very stones. It made the raw power inside Harry hum in response, a low, resonant thrum of recognition. He stood in the center of the circular room, feeling exposed under the gaze of the sleeping portraits, while Dumbledore bustled around, offering a perch to a magnificent crimson bird that burst into flame and was reborn from its ashes in the span of 30 seconds. Harry watched the display without blinking. He had seen stranger things in the forest. Awkes is a creature of immense loyalty and potent magic, Dumbledore said, his blue eyes twinkling as he settled behind his large, claw-footed desk. He is much like you in that regard, Harry. A force of nature, ill-suited to a cage. Harry grunted in response, his eyes darting around the room, mapping every exit, every object that could be used as a weapon or a shield. These lessons will not be like your classes, Dumbledore began, steepling his long fingers. Professor Flitwick can teach you the words and wand movements for 1,000 useful spells. What I must teach you is something far more fundamental. Control. He gestured to a small, ornate silver box on his desk. Your magic, as you demonstrated so vividly, in charms, is like a river that has burst its banks. It is powerful, magnificent. But it floods the landscape without direction. The spells we teach here are like irrigation channels, directing that water to do useful work. But before you can dig channels, you must learn to command the river itself. Harry understood the metaphor. His power was a storm. He could unleash it, but he could not yet shape it. We will start not with wands, Dumbledore said, but with this. He slid the silver box across the desk. Harry approached it cautiously, sniffing the air. No threat. He opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single, perfect teardrop of glass. This is a remembrall, Dumbledore explained. Normally, it turns red if its holder has forgotten something. For our purposes, I want you to do the opposite. I want you to hold it and think of nothing. Clear your mind. Find the silence within the storm. If you can make the glass go completely, perfectly clear, you will have found your center. Harry picked up the glass sphere. It was cool and smooth. He held it in his palm and closed his eyes, trying to find the silence Dumbledore spoke of. It was impossible. His mind was a constant symphony of input, the whirring of the silver instruments, the faint scent of Fawkes's rebirth, the hum of Dumbledore's own magic, the memory of Luna's smile, the gnawing anxiety for his colony. The glass in his hand glowed a murky, indeterminate gray. Do not fight the thoughts, Dumbledore advised gently. Observe them. Let them flow past you, like leaves on a stream. You are not the leaves. You are the stream bed, unmoving. Harry tried again. He let the sounds and scents wash over him. He thought of his perch high in the canopy, the quiet whisper of the wind his only companion. He thought of the patient, absolute stillness of waiting for prey. The gray in the remembrall lessened, but did not vanish. It was a start. These lessons would be long and arduous. During one such session, Dumbledore changed his approach. He leaned forward, his expression softening. Harry, to understand the present, we must sometimes look to the past. Not as a burden, but as a map. It tells us where we are, and perhaps, why. Luna told me you know very little of your own story. Harry nodded. A flash of green, a screaming mother, A great evil. The fragments of Aragog's tale. Dumbledore didn't launch into a lecture. He spoke softly, as if telling a fireside story. He told of two brave, brilliant wizards, Lily and James Potter. He spoke of their love, their courage, and their defiance of a dark lord who sought to dominate the world. He spoke of a prophecy, a wisp, red rumor of a child with the power to vanquish this evil. The Dark Lord, who called himself Voldemort, heard this prophecy, Dumbledore said, his voice dropping. And in his fear and arrogance, he went to your home to destroy you. A mere babe in a crib. But he failed. Your father tried to stop him, and was struck down. Your mother stood between you and Voldemort. She was given the choice to step aside, but she refused. She sacrificed her life for yours, Harry. And that sacrifice, that act of pure, selfless love, created a magic more powerful and ancient than anything Voldemort knew. When he tried to kill you, his own curse rebounded. Harry listened, his face an unreadable mask. He placed a hand over his own heart. He could feel the echo of that moment, a phantom pain that had lived with him always. The story gave it a name. Love. It was a foreign concept, but he saw a flicker of it in his mind. Luna's smile when he'd first said her name. The fierce, protective surge he felt when Carrick had threatened her. Maybe he was beginning to understand. That night, Dumbledore continued, his gaze heavy, you were marked. By Voldemort's curse, and by your mother's love. You survived. He was vanquished, his body destroyed. That is why our world knows your name. You were the boy who lived. Harry looked down at his hands, scarred and calloused. Boy who lived, eighth son. Two names for two different people, both trapped in the same body. Now, tell me of your world, Dumbledore prompted gently. Tell me of the silent hunger. And so Harry spoke. His sentences were clipped, his grammar broken. But with Dumbledore's patient prompting and uncanny understanding, the story came out. He described the desiccated husks, the spreading corruption, the mindlessness of the converted creatures. The way it drained the very life from the land. As Harry spoke, the twinkling light in Dumbledore's eyes vanished, replaced by a deep and profound gravity. He rose and walked to a bookshelf, pulling down a heavy, leather-bound tome. It is as I feared, he murmured, flipping through ancient, brittle pages. There are legends, from the time of the founders themselves, of a parasitic entity, neither living nor dead, that they could not destroy. A vitae haustor, a life drinker. They could only contain it, binding it deep within the earth with blood magic and powerful Haea's stones. In a place they hoped would remain undisturbed forever. He looked at Harry, his face grim. They buried it in the heart of what would one day become the Forbidden Forest. Voldemort's attack on you, the sheer magnitude of the dark magic released that night, must have cracked the ancient wards. For 16 years, it has been seeping out, slowly, patiently. And now, it learns, Harry finished, his voice a low growl. Precisely, Dumbledore affirmed, and if it has learned to convert rather than simply consume, it is infinitely more dangerous. We must find the source, the heart, of the blight, and sever it. The relative peace of these private lessons was shattered by the arrival of a new and far more insidious threat. The Ministry of Magic, under the weak and paranoid leadership of Cornelius Fudge, had been panicking about Dumbledore's pronouncements of Voldemort's return. The sudden appearance of a wild, feral Harry Potter at Hogwarts was, to them, not a miracle, but a complication. A dangerous variable in a political game they were already losing. And so, they sent their agent of control. Her name was Dolores Umbridge. She arrived on a storm-swept Tuesday, a short, toed woman clad head to toe in fluffy pink tweed. Her face was perpetually fixed in a simpering, saccharine smile, and her voice was high and girlish. But her eyes, small and dark, missed nothing. They were the eyes of a predator far more patient and vicious than any Carrick. She was introduced at breakfast as the new Hogwarts High Inquisitor, a special post created by the Ministry to ensure that educational standards are being maintained in these troubled times. Her introductory speech was a masterpiece of venomous sweetness, full of talk about preserving the old ways, pruning the substandard, and eliminating influences that threaten the purity of our magical society. Her eyes lingered on Harry for a moment too long. In that brief glance, he saw no curiosity, no fear. He saw a deep, abiding loathing. She saw him not as a boy, not even as a creature, but as a contamination. A stain to be scrubbed out. He knew, with the certainty of a hunter smelling a rival on the wind, that this woman was his enemy. Umbridge's reign began immediately. She sat in on classes, her little pink notebook and quill scratching away, making teachers and students alike nervous. She issued educational decrees, posted on the castle walls, that restricted student gatherings, banned unapproved publications including Luna's beloved Quibbler, and slowly, systematically, choked the life and freedom out of the school. Her primary focus, however, was Harry. She shadowed him, her cloying perfume preceding her like a toxic cloud. She would appear behind him in corridors, asking him sweet, poisonous questions. "Mr. Potter," she'd coo, "is it true you sleep in a nest of spiders? One must wonder about the hygiene. Mr. Potter, is it true you communicate through a series of primitive clicks and grunts?" How quaint. Harry never gave her the satisfaction of a response. He would simply turn his head, meet her gaze with his flat, unblinking stare, and hold it until she, despite her iron will, would be the first to look away. Her fake smile tightening just a fraction. This silent war of wills infuriated her. The moral crisis came sooner than anyone expected. A first-year Ravenclaw boy, small and eager to impress, had boasted that he could retrieve a sprig of flitterbloom from the forest edge for his herbology project. Overconfident and foolish, he had wandered off the path, chasing a glimmer of what he thought was the plant, and had gotten hopelessly lost. By nightfall, the castle was in a quiet panic. The boy, Stuart Ackerley, was missing. Umbridge seized the opportunity. She marched into Dumbledore's office, where he was coordinating with Professors McGonagall and Flitwick. Harry was there, having just finished a draining lesson in occlumency, a primal, instinctive version of MI. Defense. Dumbledore was trying to teach him, using his hive mind as a shield. "Headmaster," Umbridge declared, her voice dripping with false concern, "this is a direct result of your lax security. A student has wandered into that dark, savage place, no doubt lured by your pet." Her eyes flicked to Harry. "I demand that the forest be sealed by ministry decree. No one in, no one out. And the TTER creature must be confined to the dungeons until a full inquiry can be conducted. His influence is clearly a danger to the students." "That is an absurd accusation, Dolores," McGonagall snapped, her face tight with anger. "Harry was with me in Transfiguration all afternoon." Details, Umbridge waved a dismissive hand. "His very presence is an incitement to reckless behavior. The forest will be sealed. We will send a fully trained squad of ministry-hit wizards to conduct a formal grid search in the morning. It is the proper, orderly thing to do." "In the morning," Flitwick squeaked. "Madam, a first year won't survive a night in the forest. Not with the chill, let alone the creatures." Harry's head snapped up. First year, small. In his mind, the words translated to a single, powerful concept: hatchling. A lost, terrified hatchling, alone in the dark. His entire being, every instinct honed by the colony, recoiled at the thought. The protocol was absolute. You protect the young. At any cost. But his mind was also racing with a new, terrifying variable. The silent hunger. The boy wasn't just lost in the normal forest. He was lost in a forest with a growing, cancerous corruption. A forest with mindless, converted predators. The ministry's grid search would be too slow, too clumsy. They didn't know the new dangers. They would be walking into a death trap, and the boy would be a desiccated husk long before they found him. "The boy is in my territory," Harry said, his voice a low growl that cut through the argument. "The danger is new. Your men will die." Umbridge gave a tinkling, condescending laugh. "Oh, you hear that? It thinks it can give orders. You will go to your room, creature, and you will stay there. That is a direct order from a representative of the Minister for Magic." She drew her wand, a short, stubby pink thing. "Do not make me enforce it." Dumbledore placed a calming hand on Harry's shoulder. "Harry, she is correct in one regard. It is a ministry matter now. We must abide by their procedures." The look in his eyes, however, said something else entirely. It was a look of frustration, and of trust. He was letting Harry make his own choice. Harry met Umbridge's hateful gaze. He felt the cold fury building inside him, the instinct to protect warring with the unfamiliar restraints of this human world. He gave a stiff, jerky nod, turned, and walked out of the office. He did not go to Ravenclaw Tower. He moved through the castle like a wraith, his path a fluid, silent line to the nearest unguarded exit. He slipped out into the cold night and ran, not with human strides, but in the low, ground-eating lope he used in the canopy. He reached the forest edge in minutes. He paused for a single moment, took a deep breath, and let the familiar sense of his home wash over him. He was no longer the awkward outcast. He was back in his kingdom. And he was on a hunt. He didn't search randomly. He closed his eyes and stretched out his senses, his magic. He wasn't looking for the boy. He was looking for the fear. Terror had a scent, a taste on the air, a high-frequency vibration of distress. It was a beacon in the darkness. He caught a faint trace of it on the wind, mixed with the acrid, dead air smell of the hunger's corruption. The boy had wandered north. The worst possible direction. Harry plunged into the darkness, moving with a speed and silence that would have been impossible for any ministry wizard. He vaulted over fallen logs, swung from low-hanging branches, his feet barely seeming to touch the ground. This was a new kind of hunt. Not for food, but for salvation. The forest here was wrong. The usual symphony of nightlife was replaced by a dead silence. The trees were pale and sickly, their bark flaking away like sunburnt skin. He found the husks of several pixies, their tiny forms gray and weightless, clustered on a corrupted branch like dead leaves. He found the boy's trail. A dropped book, a piece of torn robe, and the scent of his terror. Growing stronger. He was close. He found him in a small, petrified clearing. The boy, Stuart Ackerley, was pressed against the base of a twisted, dead-looking willow, his face streaked with tears. Shaking so badly he could barely stand. Cornering him were 3 centaurs. But they were not the proud, noble stargazers Harry knew. Their bodies were mottled with the same gray fungus he'd seen on Sharp Leg. Their eyes were milky white voids, and their movements were jerky, unnatural. Saliva, thick and black, dripped from their bared teeth. They were puppets of the hunger. This was a horror beyond reckoning. The centaurs, the proudest and most ancient race in the forest, had been corrupted. The boy screamed, a thin, terrified sound that was cut short as one of the blighted centaurs reared up, its front hooves ready to strike. Harry didn't have time for subtlety. He exploded from the shadows. His goal was not to fight, not to kill. It was to create a diversion. He needed a blast of chaos so complete it would overwhelm the blighted creatures, simple, aggressive directives. He drew in a massive breath, pulling on the storm of his magic, but he didn't shape it into a fist. He let it remain wild, chaotic. He clapped his hands together, releasing the energy in a single, undirected wave. The result was a blinding flash of silver-white light and a deafening roar of sound that was not thunder, but the shattering of silence itself. The air pressure dropped so suddenly it felt like being punched in the chest. The blighted centaurs shrieked, their corrupted senses overloaded, and staggered back. Momentarily blinded and disoriented, the tree behind them cracked, a long fissure running up its dead trunk. In that split second of chaos, Harry moved. He was a blur, scooping the small, trembling boy into his arms. Stuart was shockingly light. Harry threw the boy over his shoulder in a practiced motion, the same way he carried injured spiderlings or haunches of meat, and ran. He didn't look back. He could hear the enraged, unnatural cries of the recovering centaurs behind him, but he was already gone, melting back into the uncorrupted part of the forest, his speed relentless. The boy on his shoulder was sobbing, babbling incoherently, clutching at the silk on Harry's back. Harry didn't stop until the scent of the hunger was gone, replaced by the clean, living smell of the woods. He emerged from the tree line near the shore of the Black Lake, the lights of Hogwarts casting a warm glow across the water. He set the boy down. Stuart Ackerley stumbled, his legs like jelly, but he was alive. He was unharmed. He looked up at Harry, his face a mask of tear-streaked awe and terror. He looked at the silent, wild-haired figure who had appeared from nowhere, blasted the world with light and sound, and carried him out of a nightmare. Professors McGonagall, Flitwick, and a pale-faced Dumbledore were already rushing down the lawn, drawn by the flash and the sound that had echoed across the grounds. They stopped dead when they saw them. Harry, standing over the trembling first year he had just rescued. A protector, emerging from the darkness. Behind them, her pink tweed suit a grotesque splash of color in the night, was Umbridge. Her face was not one of relief. The simpering smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure, triumphant fury. She saw a Mons Tear who had defied a direct ministry order. A creature who had used powerful, unregistered, and dangerous magic. A beast who had just proven how uncontrollable he truly was. There, she screeched, her voice shrill with victory, pointing a trembling finger. You see, it's a menace. It defies authority. It consorts with dark creatures. I have all the evidence I need. Harry stood his ground, the rescued boy hiding behind his legs. He had saved the hatchling. He had done the right thing. But as he looked at Umbridge's hate-filled face, he understood that in the human world, doing the right thing and being right were two very different concepts. He had won the battle for the boy's life, but he had just handed his greatest enemy the perfect weapon to start a war. Chapter 5. The Web of Deceit. The backlash was not a storm, but a slow, suffocating tide of ink and parchment. Umbridge did not move against Harry with wands and curses. She moved with the insidious, grinding power of bureaucracy. The morning after the rescue, a large, ornate proclamation board appeared in the entrance hall. Pinned to it, in stark black letters on official ministry parchment, was Educational Decree No. 28. It was a masterpiece of legalistic malice. It didn't mention Harry Potter by name. It spoke of unregistered sentient magical beings residing within Hogwarts. It outlined a new classificatio N system for any individual who could not, or would not, use a ministry-approved wand as their primary magical focus. It culminated in the final, damning paragraph. Any such individual was to be re-CL. Assified from student to XXXXX level creature, a designation usually reserved for untamable, wizard-killing beasts like dragons and manticores. As such, they were to be stripped of all student privileges, confined to a magically secured area for observation, and have their innate magical abilities bound by a ministry-certified specialist for the safety of the school. The decree was aimed at one person, and everyone knew it. The school fractured. The Slytherins, led by a smugly triumphant Draco Malfoy, were openly vicious. They no longer called Harry creature behind his back, they shouted it in the corridors. Emboldened by the ministry's official sanction, a significant portion of the student body, caught between fear and prejudice, simply averted their eyes. They saw the decree, they saw the strange boy from the forest. And they saw a problem they wanted no part of. But there was resistance. A fierce, defiant counter-current. The Weasley twins, Fred and George, saw Umbridge's decree not as a threat, but as a declaration of war. Overnight, the walls of the castle were plastered with enchanted posters depicting a toad in a pink bow being chased by a shadowy, eight-legged figure. They sold creature comforts, sweets that made the eater briefly sprout harmless but bristly spider legs, to the delight of the Gryffindors. They hailed Harry as the ultimate rebel, a symbol of defiance against the suffocating pink tyranny. Hermione Granger, armed with a stack of books taller than she was, tried to fight Umbridge with her own weapons. She cornered Harry in the library, a plaque he only tolerated because Luna enjoyed the smell of old paper. This is an outrage, she declared, slamming a copy of a guide to magical creature classifications onto the table. The XXXXX rating is specifically for known wizard killers with no capacity for moral reasoning. You saved Stuart Ackerley. There are precedents, legal challenges that can be filed. Harry just looked at her, his expression unreadable. He didn't understand precedents or legal challenges. He understood threats. Umbridge was a threat. The paper on the wall was her weapon. Ron Weasley, who had initially been deeply unnerved by Harry, now stood firmly by his side. His initial wariness had been obliterated by the raw, undeniable heroism of the rescue. Bloody hell, Harry, he said, shaking his head as they walked through the courtyard. You run into the Forbidden Forest, fight off whatever you fought off, save a firstie, and you're the one who gets punished. This whole ministry is mental. Through it all, Luna remained his anchor. The chaos and the politics, the whispers and the glares, they were all just noise to her. She saw the simple truth. "They're afraid," she said one afternoon, as they sat by the black lake, skipping stones across the glassy surface, a game she had taught him. "People are afraid of things they don't understand. And they've never understood the forest." Their relationship had deepened beyond the teacher-student dynamic it had started as. The quiet moments they shared were the only times Harry felt the crushing pressure of the castle walls recede. He was still learning her world, and she was still mesmerized by his. One evening, in a secluded corner of the astronomy tower, he tried to show her his language. "It is not words," he explained, the sentence a struggle. "It is feeling. Like the web." He took her hand, his calloused, scarred fingers surprisingly gentle as they enclosed her own. Close eyes. She obeyed, her trust in him absolute. "Feel," he whispered. He held their joined hands perfectly still and focused. He projected a simple thought, not with his mind, but through a subtle, magical vibration he channeled down his arm and into her. It was the feeling of the smooth, cool river stone she had given him. Luna gasped, her eyes flying open. "I felt that. It was cold and round, like your stone." A rare, small smile touched Harry's lips. "Yes," chid her tongue. It was the closest translation he could offer for the silent, empathic language of the spiders. She beamed, her face alight with wonder. "Teach me more." He was beginning to navigate the flood of new, confusing human emotions, with her as his guide. He felt a hot, bright anger at Malfoy's taunts, a deep frustration at Umbridge's decrees, and a fierce, protective affection for T.H.'s small pack of friends who stood by him. But the strongest, most confusing feeling of all was the one he felt when he was near Luna. It was a strange mix of peace and a fierce, primal possessiveness. He felt a constant, low-level urge to stand between her and the world, to shield her from the whispers and the scorn she so often faced for her own strangeness. He didn't have a word for it. Why knew that her presence made the stone nest bearable, and her absence made it a tomb. But while he was learning the subtleties of human emotion, the crisis in his own world was reaching its breaking point. The silent hunger, the blight, was growing stronger, faster. His link to the colony, a constant, low-level thrum in the back of his consciousness, was becoming a frantic, screaming alarm. One night, during a lesson with Dumbledore, it happened. He was holding the Remembrall, trying to find his center, when a wave of psychic agony slammed into him. It was not Voldemort's probing intrusion, it was a vast, collective cry of loss from his home. He cried out, dropping the glass sphere, and collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. "Harry, what is it?" Dumbledore was at his side in an instant. "Aragog," Harry gasped, the word torn from his throat. He could feel it, the great, ancient life force that had been the heart of the colony, the one who had raised him, had finally guttered and gone out. The Patriarch was dead. The silence left in the wake of Aragog's consciousness was a gaping, screaming void. And into that void, something else whispered. It was not a single voice. It was a chorus of dead things. The whispers of the corrupted centaurs, the empty husks of the pixies, the mindless hunger of Sharp Leg. It was the voice of the blight itself, a collective consciousness of everything it had consumed. And it was whispering directly into the part of his mind that was connected to the forest. "Less than little king. Little protector, you have failed them. The old one is gone. The web rots. They are afraid. They are weak. We can make them strong. We can make you strong. Join us. Let the hunger in. We can devour your enemies. The pink one. The pale one. All of them. We can give you the power to crush this stone nest, greater than." "No," Harry snarled, pressing his palms into his temples, fighting the insidious, tempting promises. The power the blight offered was immense, a tidal wave of destructive force. A part of him, the primal, cornered predator, wanted to accept it, to unleash it on Umbridge and her decrees. He felt Dumbledore's hand on his shoulder, a steadying anchor of calm, clean magic. "Breathe, Harry. Build your walls. The forest in your mind. The shadows. The canopy. Do not let it find purchase." With a supreme effort of will, Harry fought back. He visualized his mental landscape not as a fortress, but as a vast, trackless wilderness, a labyrinth of shimmering webs and endless trees. He let the voice of the blight get lost in the echoes, unable to find him, the center. The whispers faded, retreating into a low, angry buzz. He was left shaking, cold sweat beating on his forehead. Aragog was gone. The Blight now had a voice. And the civil war he had averted was about to reignite. Carrick's faction, leaderless and terrified, would see Aragog's death and Harry's absence as the final proof that the old ways were dead and their protector had abandoned them. They would be ripe for the Hunger's whispers. His colony was on the verge of being consumed from within. The next day, Umbridge made her move. She chose the Great Hall during lunch, the moment of maximum public exposure. She strode into the hall, flanked by 4 grim-faced Aurors in official ministry combat robes. They were not there for a parade. They were there for an extraction. By the authority of Educational Decree No. 28, Umbridge announced, her voice magically amplified to a sickeningly sweet boom, I am here to escort the being known as Harry Potter to a secure ministry-holding facility for assessment and containment. The hall fell into a deathly silence. Harry, who had been sitting with Luna and Ron at the Ravenclaw table, slowly stood up. He didn't look scared. He looked tired. Tired of running. Tired of hiding. He's done nothing wrong, Hermione shouted, jumping to her feet. Silence, Miss Granger, or you will be next for detention, Umbridge trilled. Aurors, secure the creature. Use force if necessary. The 4 Aurors advanced, their wands drawn. They spread out, attempting to surround him. Harry didn't move. He just watched them, his eyes calculating angles, trajectories, weaknesses. Don't do this, he said, his voice low and flat. It wasn't a plea, it was a warning. The lead Auror, a grim-faced man with a scarred cheek, ignored him. Stupefy, he yelled, a jet of red light shooting from his wand. Harry moved. He didn't dodge. He simply dropped, his body falling boneless to the floor, and the jet of light passed harmlessly over his head. In the same motion, he swept his leg out, hooking the Auror's ankle and sending him crashing to the stone floor. The other 3 reacted instantly, firing a volley of spells. Incarcerus, Petrificus Totalis, Impedimenta. But they were firing at where he had been. Harry was a blur of motion. He rolled, came up on his feet, and slammed his palm against the underside of the long Ravenclaw table. With a grunt of effort and a surge of his raw, kinetic magic, he heaved. The massive oak table, laden with plates and goblets, flipped into the air with a deafening crash. It rose like a barricade, absorbing the S.P.Ls in a shower of splintering wood and shattering porcelain. Food and pumpkin juice rained down on the screaming students. The Aurors stared, stunned, at the sheer, impossible strength. Before they could recover, Harry was moving again. He darted towards the nearest one, his hand a blur. He didn't strike the man. He struck the wand, a sharp, precise blow to the wrist. The Auror cried out in pain and his wand flew from his grasp. Harry caught it. He didn't know the spells, but he didn't need to. He held the unfamiliar piece of wood, felt the spark of captured magic within it, and pushed his own intent through it. He aimed at the feet of the remaining 2 Aurors. He didn't think of a spell. He thought of his home. He thought of a web. A thick, shimmering, impossibly strong torrent of spider silk erupted from the end of the wand. It wasn't a spell, it was a raw manifestation of his will. The silk wrapped around the Aurors' legs, tangling them, binding them. They struggled, but the silk was unnaturally strong. Coated in his magic, they fell, hopelessly ensnared. In the space of 10 seconds, 4 trained ministry Aurors had been utterly, efficiently, and non-lethally neutralized. Harry stood in the center of the chaos, the captured wand in one hand, breathing evenly. He had not moved with anger, but with the cold, brutal precision of a predator establishing its territory. He had not sought to kill or even to harm. He had sought only to dominate. To end the threat. The entire school, and Dolores Umbridge, stared in shocked, terrified silence. They had heard stories. They had seen a feather embedded in the ceiling. But this was different. This was a display of power and combat prowess that was utterly alien. He hadn't used spells. He had used speed, strength, and a magic so raw it defied classification. The great doors of the hall swung open. Dumbledore stood there, his face grim, his usual twinkle gone. He took in the scene at a glance, the overturned table, the groaning, entangled Aurors. Umbridge's face purple with rage, and Harry, standing like a king in the ruins of the battlefield. The standoff was over. But everything had changed. Harry dropped the captured wand. It clattered on the stone floor. He looked at Dumbledore, and the exhaustion was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He was no longer a confused boy caught between worlds. He was a leader whose home was on fire. Aragog is dead, Harry said, his voice carrying in the silent hall. The Blight has a voice. My colony will fall. He looked past Dumbledore, his gaze fixed on something far beyond the castle walls. He was no longer asking for help. He was no longer a student seeking knowledge. The time for that was over. He was a king, in exile no more. I am going back, he declared, his voice ringing with an authority no ministry decree could grant. I am going to save my people. Chapter 6. The Shadow of the Serpent. The Forbidden Forest was a fortress, and Harry was its master. But now, as he prepared for his return, he felt like a king marching to besiege his own castle, already half conquered by a foreign power. He stood with Dumbledore in the headmaster's office, the whirring silver instruments strangely silent, as if holding their breath. The confrontation in the great hall had shattered the fragile peace. Umbridge was temporarily cowed, her public humiliation leaving her scrambling for a new political angle, but she was far from defeated. The real war, however, was not one of ink and decrees. It was waiting for him under the dark canopy. To return, now is to walk into the Blight's embrace, Dumbledore warned, his face etched with concern. It knows you, it whispered to you, it will be waiting. My brethren are there, Harry stated, his voice a low growl. It was not an argument. It was a simple, immovable fact. They are leaderless, afraid. The Blight will offer them power. Some will accept. He looked at his hands. I must be there, to give them another choice. It was during this tense strategy session that the third predator entered the hunting ground. It began as a faint throb behind Harry's eyes, a familiar, unwelcome pressure. He had felt it before. A faint echo during moments of high stress or anger. He had always dismissed it as part of the sensory overload of the human world. Now, it was different. It was focused. It was deliberate. And intelligence was on the other end of that throbbing connection, and it was knocking at the gates of his mind. He stumbled back, a gasp escaping his lips, his hand flying to the lightning bolt scar on his forehead. It wasn't whispering like the Blight. It was a sharp, piercing spike of command, an arrogant, dominant presence that sought not to corrupt, but to conquer. Less than so, the little legend is more than just a story, greater than a cold serpentine voice hissed directly into his consciousness. Less than they said you were wild. They did not say you were interesting. Greater than. Harry's reaction was pure, feral instinct. He didn't build walls of shadow and memory as Dumbledore had taught him. His mind was a hive, a collective. When invaded, the hive swarmed. He didn't try to block the voice. He unleashed his own mental landscape upon it. Voldemort, from his sanctum miles away, had expected to find the simple, emotional mind of a teenage boy, a mind he could easily twist and torment. Instead, he slammed into a psychic maelstrom. He was assaulted by a chaotic, billion-faceted consciousness. He felt the silent chittering of 1,000 spiders, the scent of damp earth and blood, the vertiginous sensation of moving through a high canopy, the cold, calculating instinct of a predator, the grief for a dying patriarch, the blinding protective rage for a silver-eyed girl. It was a mind that was simultaneously one and legion, a labyrinth of alien thought and primal emotion. The Dark Lord recoiled, not in pain, but in sheer, disbelieving shock. He felt like a man who had tried to open a simple wooden door and found it leading into the heart of a raging star. Less than what are you? Greater than Voldemort's mental voice was stripped of its arrogance, replaced by a thread of genuine, furious confusion. Harry didn't answer. He pushed back, his own silent, untamed will surging through the connection, a wild force seeking to expel the intruder. The scar on his forehead burned with white-hot agony. The office around him blurred. He was no longer in a room with an old wizard, he was in a battle for the territory of his own soul. Harry, Dumbledore's voice cut through the haze. The headmaster had his wand out, not pointed at Harry, but tracing calming silvery runes in the air around his head. A wave of cool, orderly magic washed over him, reinforcing his defenses. Do not fight him head-on. He is the master of this art. Use your nature. Be the forest he cannot map. Be the web he cannot break. Snape swept into the room, his black robes billowing, his expression a mask of grim urgency. Dumbledore must have summoned him. He has made contact, Snape stated, his dark eyes fixed on Harry's trembling form. The connection is stronger than I anticipated. He is not like us, Severus, Dumbledore said, his voice taut. His mind is different. Occlumency as we know it will not work. We must adapt. Over the next frantic hours, Dumbledore and Snape worked not to teach Harry, but to help him weaponize what he already was. Snape, the master Occlumens, was baffled and infuriated. His usual method of brutally assaulting a student's mind to force them to build defenses was useless. Trying to assault Harry's mind was like punching a fog bank that concealed 1,000 angry hornets. You do not have a mind, Potter, Snape snarled in frustration after one failed attempt. You have a bloody ecosystem. There are no ordered memories to shield, no emotions to suppress. It's all just instinct and appetite. Then that is our shield, Dumbledore countered. He turned to Harry, who was breathing heavily, sweat slicking his brow. Harry, when he comes for you again, do not show him a fortress. Show him the hunt. Show him the rustle of a leaf, the vibration of a single strand of silk, the patient waiting in the dark. Give him a billion meaningless details. Drown him in the symphony of the forest until he cannot find the musician. It was a primal form of occlumency, built on misdirection and sensory overload rather than sheer force of will. It was exhausting, but it was a defense. A defense he would need, for the game had now changed. Voldemort was no longer just a distant evil from a story. He was a direct, personal rival. And his curiosity was piqued. The prophecy was a trifle, a loose end to be snipped. This feral, powerful, alien version of his fabled vanquisher was a prize. A puzzle, a perversion of Slytherin's own Parseltongue legacy, a boy who spoke not to snakes, but to spiders, that Voldemort found both insulting and utterly fascinating. He had to understand it. He had to possess it, or destroy it. His next move was one of terrifying, strategic genius. During another probing attack on Harry's mind, a feint designed to test the new defenses, Voldemort didn't just feel the chaos of the forest. He felt something else. He felt the cold, dead, whispering presence of the silent hunger. He did not recoil from it. He did not see a blight. He saw a magnificent, untapped weapon. A mindless, endlessly multiplying army that consumed and converted, waiting for a master. He apparated to the edge of the forbidden forest, a hooded specter of malice under a sickly yellow moon. He did not enter it as a man walking through woods. He was a serpent of pure dark magic, his consciousness sliding through the corrupted northern sector, drawn to the source of the blight. He found what remained of the ancient Hayes stones Dumbledore had spoken of, cracked and leaking necrotic energy. Voldemort laughed, a high, cold sound that made the dead leaves skitter away. The Founders, in their arrogance, had tried to imprison a force of nature. He would unshackle it. He placed a pale, long-fingered hand on the largest, most fractured stone and poured his own magic into the rupture. It was like pouring gasoline onto a pilot light. The blight, which had been a slow, creeping cancer, now had a malevolent intelligence and an infinite source of fuel. It surged, a tidal wave of dark energy, twisting and corrupting everything it touched. The mindless hunger was now Voldemort's blightwood, and he gave it its first command. Expand, hunt, destroy the stone nest. The assault came without warning. It was not a stealthy infiltration. It was a horde. The wards around Hogsmeade shrieked a warning just moments before the first wave hit. A tide of blighted creatures boiled out of the forest edge. It was a nightmare menagerie. Corrupted centaurs, their bodies moving with sickening, puppet-like jerks, galloped alongside hulking Acromanulas, Carrick's lost faction, now slaves to the hunger, their multiple eyes glowing with a dead white light. Twisted, snarling Urkling and packs of skeletal Jarvies swarmed between them. The Order of the Phoenix, alerted by Dumbledore, apparated into the village with sharp cracks of displaced air. Meeting the wave head-on. Spells of red and green and blue lit up the night, explosions rocking the quaint street. Kingsley Shacklebolt's powerful Patronus, a great silver lynx, tore through a pack of corrupted Jarvies. Nymphadora Tonks, her hair a shocking battle pink, sent stunning spells flying from behind an overturned cart. Dumbledore was a tempest of power, a single figure holding the main road. his wand a blur as he conjured great silver shields and gouts of roaring flame. But the tide was endless. For every creature they struck down, 2 more shambled out of the darkness. Harry saw it all from the astronomy tower, a bird's-eye view of the battle. He saw the flashes of spell light, the encroaching darkness, the desperate fight. This was not a border skirmish. This was an invasion, and they were losing. They fight. Wrong, he growled, his knuckles white as he gripped the parapet. Too slow. One at a time. The Order fought like duelists, picking targets. The Blightwood fought like a flood, overwhelming everything. I have to go, he said to Luna, who stood beside him, her face pale but her eyes wide and focused, taking in the terrible scene. They're protecting the village, she said, her voice quiet but firm. The people, the hatchlings. Her words struck him like a physical blow. Hatchlings. There were innocents in those houses. His pack was down there somewhere, Ron and Hermione. No doubt trying to help. This wasn't about his colony anymore. This was about all the hatchlings. He didn't use the stairs. He swung himself over the parapet, caught a lower ledge, and began to descend the tower wall, his hands and feet finding impossible holds in the ancient stone. He dropped the last 30 feet, landing in a silent crouch on the grounds, and ran towards the chaos of Hogsmeade. He entered the battle not as a wizard, but as a force of nature. He didn't have a wand. He didn't need one. He vaulted over a low stone wall and slammed into the flank of the blighted horde. A whirlwind of motion. His first blow was a concussive blast of raw magic from his open palm, sending a corrupted Acromantula reeling back into 2 of its brethren. He flowed through the battle, a chaotic, unpredictable element the Order's structured spellcasting couldn't account for. He used the environment, his impossible speed, his terrifying strength. He snatched up a heavy wrought iron signpost and used it as a club, shattering the legs of a blighted centaur. He used his silk, not from a wand, but secreted from glands on his wrists, a biological quirk, a fusion of magic and the spider venom that had surely poisoned him as a child, to ensnare and trip the charging creatures, creating bottlenecks and openings for the Order's spells. Remus Lupin, his face grim, saw Harry fighting and shouted, "Harry! Get back, it's too dangerous." But Harry was in his element. He was a hunter among monsters. He gave Lupin a sharp, wild grin that was all teeth and disappeared back into the fray. He was defending his territory, and his territory had just expanded to include this strange, vulnerable village of humans. Then he saw her. Luna had followed him. She wasn't fighting like the others. She stood near the 3 broomsticks, her own wand out, but she wasn't casting curses. She was casting a brilliant, shimmering silver shield, protecting a small group of Hogsmeade residents who had been caught in the open. Behind her shield, a mother clutched her crying child. Hatchlings. A huge, blighted creature, a thing that might have once been a troll, now twisted with fungal growths and moving with unnatural speed, broke through the Order's line. It ignored the Order's firing spells at its back. Its dead white eyes were fixed on the brightest source of light and life, Luna's shield. It raised a massive, gnarled club and brought it down. Time seemed to slow down. Harry saw the club descending. He saw the strain on Luna's face as she poured her magic into the shield. He saw the terror in the eyes of the mother behind her. He was too far away to physically intercept it. A soundless roar of pure, primal fury erupted from deep within his soul. It was not a thought. It was an instinct more fundamental than breathing. The singular, absolute, undeniable imperative: protect her. The storm of magic inside him didn't just flood its banks. The dam broke. A wave of pure, silent, invisible force erupted from him. It was not a concussive blast. It was an annihilation. The ground around him cracked. The air itself seemed to scream as it was torn apart. The blighted creatures in a 20-foot radius, Acromanulas, Urklings, the charging troll, were not thrown back. They disintegrated. They were unmade, their corrupted forms dissolving into clouds of gray dust and foul-smelling vapor. The wave of force washed over the troll, and it simply ceased to exist, its descending club turning to powder mid-swing. The shockwave continued, blasting a deep, smoking crater into the cobblestone street where the troll had stood. The battle screeched to a halt. Everyone, Order members, blighted creatures, Dumbledore himself, froze, staring at the epicenter of the destruction. Harry stood there, his body trembling, his knuckles white, his chest heaving as if he had just run 100 miles. A faint, silvery aura of raw power bled from his skin, making the air around him shimmer. He had not just unleashed his magic. For a split second, he had become his magic. And it was a power on a scale that no one, not even Dumbledore, had ever conceived he possessed. It was the power of a mother's love, twisted through a wild, feral soul, and unleashed by a singular, desperate need. He looked at Luna. She was safe. The shield had held. He took a staggering step towards her, the last of the battle fury draining out of him, leaving a terrifying, hollow emptiness. In the infirmary, the silence was broken only by the quiet hum of healing spells and the distant, mournful cry of Fox. Luna, recovering from magical exhaustion but otherwise unharmed, sat on the edge of her cot. Harry sat on the floor beside her, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. He wouldn't let Madame Pomfrey touch him. He had no visible injuries. But the wound was deeper. He felt contaminated by his own power, by the sheer, terrifying violence of his own protective instinct. I wanted it to die, he whispered, his voice raspy and broken. He wouldn't look at her. That thing, going for you. I wanted to unmake it. He looked at his trembling hands. It felt good. The power. For a second, he finally looked up at her, and his green eyes, usually so full of wild certainty, were filled with a profound and terrible fear. It was not the fear of Voldemort, or of the Blightwood, or of the coming war. It was the fear of himself. What if I'm the monster, Luna? He asked, his voice cracking. What if Aragog was wrong to save me? What if I'm just another kind of hunger? Luna didn't answer with platitudes. She didn't tell him he was a hero. She slid off the cot and sat on the floor in front of him, tucking her legs beneath her. She reached out and took his trembling, blood-stained hands in her own. Her touch was gentle, but firm, grounding. When you found me in the forest, she said, her voice as calm and steady as the deep ocean, I saw a protector. When you fought Carrick, I saw a leader. When you saved Stuart, I saw a hero. She squeezed his hands. Just now, when that thing came for us, I saw all of those things. But I also saw a boy who was afraid of losing someone he cares about. She leaned forward, her large, silvery eyes holding his, demanding he see the truth in them. You're not a monster, Harry. You have a monster inside you. We all do. Dumbledore does. My father does. Even I do. A small, sad smile touched her lips. You're just not as good at hiding it as the rest of us. Your heart is too wild to build cages around it. For the first time since he had come to the stone nest, Harry felt the full, crushing weight of his fractured existence. He was a boy and a beast, a protector and a destroyer, a savior and a weapon of mass destruction. He was wrestling not just with his past or his future, but with the very nature of his own soul. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. Her presence was the only thing that felt real, the only thing that silenced the warring voices in his head, the whispers of the Blight, the hiss of Voldemort, and the roar of his own terrifying power. He had found his humanity, not by becoming a wizard, but through the kindness of a girl who saw a soul worth saving inside the monster. And now, he was terrified that the monster would consume them both. Chapter 7. Heart of the Blightwood. The aftermath of the Hogsmeade assault was a grim, silent tableau. The village was scarred, the cobblestones blackened and cratered. The Order of the Phoenix, exhausted and shaken, tended to the wounded and surveyed the damage. But the most significant change was not in the physical landscape, it was in the room where the war was being planned. The atmosphere in Dumbledore's office had shifted from academic concern to grim, wartime urgency. The map of the Forbidden Forest spread across the headmaster's desk was no longer a subject of study, it was a battlefield. The Blightwood is no longer a creeping infection, Dumbledore stated, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. His gaze swept over the assembled members of the Order, Lupin, Tonks, a grim-faced Kingsley Shacklebolt, and a silently brooding Snape. Harry and Luna stood beside the map, a silent, united front. It is a sentient weapon, and it is being directed. Voldemort has turned the very heart of the forest into his personal army. We can't fight it defensively, Lupin said, his face pale. The lines of exhaustion deep around his eyes. The horde is endless. We were nearly overrun. If it hadn't been for Harry. He trailed off, glancing at the boy with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The memory of that wave of annihilating force was seared into all their minds. Indeed, Dumbledore agreed, his eyes resting on Harry. But even a power like yours has its limits, Harry. Unleashing it on that scale again could unmake you as surely as it unmade those creatures. We cannot win a war of attrition. We must strike at the source. He tapped the center of the map. A region so deep within the forest it was marked only by ancient, speculative runes. The Vitae Haustor, the original breach. Voldemort is using it as an amplifier, a command center. It is the heart of the Blightwood. If we can sever it, seal the fissure, the army will lose its animating force. An assault into the heart of a corrupted forest teeming with an army of the dead, to F. I'd an ancient magical parasite being puppeteered by the Dark Lord, Snape drawled, his voice dripping with acid sarcasm. The odds are refreshingly straightforward. It's the only way, Harry said, his voice cutting through the pessimism. All eyes turned to him. He was no longer the frightened boy from the infirmary. He had faced his fear, and with Luna's help, had caged it, if not tamed it. His eyes were clear, his resolve absolute. This is my territory. I know its paths. I know its secrets. The Blightwood is a corruption of my home. I will lead the charge. There was a moment of stunned silence. This was not the feral child or the confused student. This was a king claiming his right, and his duty. You cannot go alone, Kingsley stated, his deep voice resonating with authority. The order will go with you. Harry shook his head. No, you are too slow, too loud. He meant no offense. It was a simple statement of fact. You move like wizards. You think like wizards. The Blightwood is not a wizard. It is a corrupted animal. You must fight it like an animal. Strategic. Vicious. You will be the hammer. He looked at Dumbledore. You will draw its attention. The main force. A full-scale assault on the forest's edge. Loud and bright. You will make Voldemort think you are trying to brute force your way to the heart. You will be the diversion. He pointed to a different part of the map, a winding, circuitous route through the high canopy and treacherous ravines. I will be the knife. A small team. Fast, silent. We go around the main force, through the paths the Blightwood will not expect. We cut out its heart while it is looking at you. The strategic brilliance of the plan was undeniable. It was a classic pincer movement, adapted for a magical, three-dimensional battlefield. Dumbledore's eyes shone with a flicker of their old light, a deep respect for the mind before him, a mind that saw the battlefield not as a chessboard, but as a hunting ground. A knife needs a sharp edge, Dumbledore said. Who would be on your team? I need those who know the forest as I do, Harry declared. Those who see it not as a threat, but as home. I must unite them. The task was deemed impossible. The factions of the Forbidden Forest were ancient, proud, and deeply distrustful of one another. Spiders and centaurs were ancestral enemies. Wizards were meddlesome outsiders. An alliance was unthinkable. Harry didn't ask for permission. He simply left. His first destination was the Great Web. He returned to his colony not as a prodigal son, but as a warlord. He found it in chaos. Aragog's death and the Blight's whispers had fractured the Acromanulas completely. Carrick, his dislocated leg messily healed into a limp, had rallied a faction of terrified, aggressive spiders. Why were on the verge of accepting the Blight's offer of power, seeing it as their only salvation. Harry strode into the central chamber, a place of grieving and fear. He didn't speak. He didn't negotiate. He walked directly to Carrick. You are a fool, Harry projected, his chitter tongue a blast of pure, commanding thought that made the other spiders recoil. You would trade your mind for a borrowed strength. You would become a puppet. You dishonor the memory of the patriarch. You dishonor the colony. You abandoned us. Carrick snarled back, his fangs dripping with venom. You play with the soft skins while our home rots. The hunger offers us survival. It offers you slavery, Harry's spoken voice echoed, harsh and cold. I offer you a chance to fight. To remain. He dropped into a combat stance. I challenged you once for status. I won. I challenge you now for the soul of this colony. To the death. The duel was nothing like the first. There was no mercy in Harry's movements. He was a phantom of righteous fury. He moved with a speed that seemed to defy the laws of physics, a blur of dark silk and focused rage. Carrick was strong and desperate, but he was fighting a force of nature. Harry didn't use kinetic blasts or grand displays. He used his obsidian knife, his bare hands, and the terrain of the web itself. He was everywhere at once, a series of precise, debilitating strikes to leg joints, to sensitive eye clusters, to the soft underbelly. He disarmed Carrick, shattered 2 of his legs with calculated, brutal blows, and pinned him to the ground, the point of his obsidian knife pressed against the soft tissue where the spider's head met its thorax. The colony was silent, watching their 2 strongest champions in a battle for their future. Harry looked into Carrick's terrified, hate-filled eyes. He could kill him. He could end the rivalry forever. But he saw not just a challenger, he saw a desperate, terrified soldier. He remembered Luna's words. You have a monster inside you. Your heart is too wild to build cages around it. He could feed the monster, or he could command it. He pulled back the knife. The war is not with each other, he projected, his voice resonating with the authority of a true king. It is with the blight. Fight with me, and we will cleanse our home. Fight against me, and you will be purged along with the sickness. Choose. He stood up and turned his back on his defeated rival, the ultimate sign of dominance. Carrick, broken and humbled, laid his head to the web strand in a gesture of absolute submission. The rest of the colony followed suit. The Acromanulas were united. His next meeting was even more difficult. He walked, alone and unarmed, into the sacred grove of the centaurs. They met him with knocked arrows and stony faces, their leader, Megorian, a grim, powerful figure with a beard as black as midnight. The spider child comes to our lands, Megorian said, his voice a low rumble. You have the stench of the blight fighters on you, and the stench of your own kind. I am not here as a spider child or a wizard, Harry said, his voice calm and respectful, meeting Megorian's gaze without flinching. He knew the centaur customs from Aragog's stories. You do not show fear. You do not lie. You speak plainly. I am here as a guardian of this forest. The same as you. The stars tell of a great corruption, another centaur, Ronan, murmured. His eyes on the heavens. A shadow that eats the light. The stars do not lie, Harry affirmed. A blightwood grows from the heart of our forest. It has taken some of your kind. He saw a flicker of pain and anger in their eyes. It has taken some of mine. It is puppeteered by the wizard who marked me, the one called Voldemort. It will consume everything. The trees, the creatures, the soil. The stars you read, everything. This is a wizard's war, Megorian stated, his hand tightening on his bow. Let the wizards fight it. It is a forest's war, Harry countered, his voice ringing with conviction. And wizards are not enough to win it. I have united the spider folk. I have made an alliance with the wizards of the stone nest. Now I come to you, the centaurs, the oldest and wisest of the forest's children. I do not ask you to fight for wizards, or for spiders. I ask you to fight for your home. He looked at Megorian, a leader speaking to a leader. I am adding a strike to the heart of the blightwood. I will succeed, or I will die. I would have the bows and the wisdom of the centaurs at my back. Will you let your ancestral home be devoured by a wizard's shadow? Or will you fight to preserve it? There was a long, tense silence. The centaurs murmured amongst themselves. Megorian stared at Harry, his ancient eyes weighing the boy, the plan, the desperation of their situation. Finally, he lowered his bow. The stars are veiled, Megorian declared. The future is clouded, but this path, this one is clear. We will ride with you, child of 2 worlds. We will see this shadow burned from our sky. The alliance was forged, an impossible army of wizards, spiders, and centaurs, united under the command of a boy who was all 3 and none of them. The plan was set in motion at dusk. A thunderous roar of spell fire erupted at the forest's edge as Dumbledore and the Order began their grand diversion. Flashes of light illuminated the canopy, and the NRAGED shrieks of the blighted horde echoed through the trees as they rushed to meet the perceived threat. Under the cover of that chaos, Harry's strike team assembled. It was a small, elite group. Harry, his presence a silent hum of coiled power. Luna, her face pale but resolute, her magic a quiet, steadying light. Megorian, leading a contingent of 10 of his strongest centaur warriors, their bows strung, their faces grim. and a dozen of Harry's most loyal Acromanulas, including the newly humbled Carrick, his limp a constant reminder of his oath, their chittering a low, eager hum of the coming hunt. "Stay close," Harry commanded, his voice barely a whisper. "Move as one. We touch the ground only when we must. The blight is strongest there." They plunged into the darkness. The journey was a descent into a living hell. They bypassed the main battle, moving through the high canopy, the spiders and Harry flowing over the web highways, the centaurs galloping silently on paths of moss and shadow only they knew. Luna, held secure in a silken harness on Harry's back, acted as their magical sensor, her unique sensitivity allowing her to detect pockets of concentrated corruption ahead. The further they went, the more the forest's life force seemed to drain away. The air grew cold and thin, smelling of ozone and decay. The trees were skeletal, gray things, their branches like grasping claws. The silence was absolute, a dead void where the symphony of the forest should have been. The magic was so corrupted it felt like acid on the skin. Every member of the party felt it, a draining, nauseating pressure. They fought, not a grand battle, but a series of brutal, lightning-fast skirmishes. Pockets of blighted creatures, guards left behind by Voldemort, ambushed them from the shadows. A flock of corrupted auguries. Their mournful cries turned into flesh-shredding screeches, dove from the dead branches. The centaurs, arrows, tipped with silver and venom, brought them down. A colossal, fungus-ridden Graphorn charged them through a ravine. Harry and his Acromanulas swarmed it, their combined strength and silk bringing the beast down in a tangled, thrashing heap. Harry was the linchpin. He was everywhere, his instincts guiding the disparate group, making them fight as a single entity. He directed the spiders with silent, empathic commands, anticipated the centaurs' movements, and relied on Luna's magical senses. His hand often resting on her shoulder to feel the faint tremors she sent as warnings. Left, trap, above, he was the mind, they were the body. Finally, after hours of struggle that felt like an eternity, they reached it, a vast, sunken crater, a bowl of dead earth and shattered rock, where no tree grew. In the center, the air shimmered and warped around a pulsating black fissure in the ground, the heart of the Blightwood. The source. It pulsed with a sickening, necrotic light, a wound in the world, and the whispers of the hunger were a deafening roar in their minds. But it was not unguarded. Coiled around the fissure, as if nursing it, was Voldemort's masterpiece. It had once been a Hungarian horntail, the most fearsome of all dragons. Now, it was a perversion. Its black scales were flaking away to reveal gray, fungoid flesh beneath. Its eyes, once molten gold, were milky white voids. Black sludge dripped from its jaws, and its breath was not fire, but a rolling cloud of life-draining gas. Its mind was gone, enslaved to the blight, a living siege engine of pure destruction. The blighted dragon raised its head, its dead eyes fixing on them, and you. NLE ashed a roar that was not a sound of dragon fire, but of the grave itself. The hammer and the anvil. Harry roared, his voice cutting through the psychic noise. It was the name of the final strategy. Megorian, spiders, you are the hammer. Draw its attention, cripple it, do not let it reach the fissure. Luna and I are the anvil. The centaurs let out a unified war cry, a sound of ancient, wild power, and charged, arrows flying. They were impossibly brave, firing and retreating, their hooves striking sparks on the dead stone as they peppered the dragon's corrupted hide. The Acromanulas swarmed from the other side, a black tide of chittering fury, spitting venom and shooting thick, entangling webs at the dragon's legs and wings, trying to bog it down. The battle was titanic, a myth brought to brutal, bloody life. The dragon thrashed, its tail leveling a rock formation, its gaseous breath withering everything it touched. It was a force of pure entropy. While the hammer battered the beast, Harry and Luna sprinted for the fissure. We have to close it. Harry yelled over the din. It's pure magic. I need to force it shut, but I can't touch it directly. I need a conduit. Your magic is wild, Harry. Luna shouted back, her face grim with determination. You need to contain it, focus it into a single point. I can't close the fissure, but I can help you build the weapon to do it. They reached the edge of the pulsating black wound. The raw, negative energy washing from it was so strong it made their teeth ache. The blighted dragon, enraged by the arrows and webs, roared and turned its attention towards them. Now, Luna, Harry yelled. He drove his hands into the dead earth, bracing himself. He closed his eyes and drew on the storm inside him, the totality of his power, the force that had leveled a street in Hogsmeade. But this time, he didn't unleash it. He held it, a miniature supernova of raw, screaming power contained within his body. The ground around him cracked, his veins stood out like cords. And the silver aura around him blazed into a blinding sun. Luna stood before him, her back to the fissure, her wand held in a two-handed grip. She wasn't looking at the dragon. She was looking at Harry. She began to chant in a language he didn't know, an old, flowing tongue of pure magic. A shimmering, crystalline shield, complex and multi-layered, formed around Harry, not to protect him, but to contain him. It was a focusing lens. The wild, explosive energy of his magic began to coalesce, drawn by her spell, into a single, blinding point of light between his hands. The dragon charged, shaking off spiders and ignoring arrows. Megorian screamed a warning. The point of light between Harry's hands stabilized. It was no longer a chaotic storm. It was a star, pure and white and terrible. Now, they both screamed as one. Harry thrust his hands forward. The star shot from between his palms, a lance of pure, concentrated, annihilating power, shaped and focused by Luna's spell. It struck the charging dragon square in the chest. There was no explosion, only a silent, all-encompassing white light. The dragon's roar was cut off. Its corrupted form didn't burn or shatter. It was simply erased from existence, a hole punched clean through reality. The lance of light continued, unabated, and struck the black fissure. For a moment, two opposing infinities met. The ravenous, consuming void of the blight and the pure, absolute power of a boy's wild heart. The world went white. The sound of a universe tearing apart filled their heads. Then, silence. Harry collapsed, his strength utterly spent. Blood trickling from his nose and ears. Luna fell to her knees beside him, her own magic drained. The fissure was gone. In its place was a newly formed, glassy crater of obsidian. Humming with residual energy, the sickly gray light of the blightwood was extinguished. Across the forest, the blighted creatures froze. The dead white light in their eyes faded. With their connection to the heart severed, they were just corpses again. They collapsed into heaps of rotting flesh and fungus. They had done it. In the sudden, ringing silence of the crater, a soft, polite clapping sound echoed. Harry pushed himself up, his muscles screaming. Standing on the far side of the crater, looking utterly unharmed and impeccably dressed, was Voldemort. He wasn't even breathing hard. He surveyed the scene, the glassy crater, the exhausted boy, the dissolving remains of his dragon, and his red eyes settled on Harry. They were not filled with anger or frustration. They were alight with a terrifying, possessive fascination. "Oh, magnificent," Voldemort whispered, his voice a sibilant hiss that slithered across the crater. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Truly magnificent. I thought to harness a force of nature. It seems I underestimated the competition." He looked at Harry, a chilling, proprietary smile spreading across his snake-like face. "Prophecy. Destiny. How small my ambitions were. You are not a lamb for the slaughter, Harry Potter. You are a rival king." He raised a hand, not to cast a curse, but in a gesture of almost paternal pride. "This changes everything." With a final, lingering look of profound interest, he turned and vanished with a faint pop, leaving Harry and his battered, exhausted allies alone in the heart of their newly cleansed, silent forest. The battle was won. The Blightwood was dead, but they were left with the horrifying, absolute certainty that this was not an ending. It was the beginning of a new, far more terrifying war. Chapter 8. The Unwoven King. The journey out of the forest was a slow, solemn procession. The first rays of dawn were filtering through the canopy, illuminating a world reborn. The air, which had been thick with the stench of death and decay, now smelled of clean, damp earth and pine. The silence of the Blightwood was replaced by the tentative, hesitant chirping of birds, the rustle of unseen creatures returning to their homes. The forest was breathing again. Harry walked at the head of the procession, Luna's hand a small, warm anchor in his. He was drained, his body ached with a bone-deep exhaustion, but his spirit was calm. The frantic, warring voices in his head were silent. The blight was gone. Voldemort's hiss had receded. For the first time, The only presence in his mind was his own. He was singular. He was whole. His alliance, battered and weary, followed. The centaurs, their numbers slightly diminished, walked with a new, profound respect in their ancient eyes. The Acromanulas, including a silent, limping Carrick, moved with a quiet purpose, the frantic fear gone from their collective consciousness. They had faced oblivion and survived. They had fought alongside their ancestral enemies and won. The old world was gone. They met Dumbledore and the Order at the forest's edge. The diversionary battle had been costly, but they had held the line. The moment the Blightwood heart was severed, the attacking horde had collapsed into dust and rot. Dumbledore's gaze fell upon the united, impossible army emerging from the trees, and the look on his face was one of profound, world-altering awe. He saw not just a victory, but a paradigm shift. In the days that followed, the political landscape of the wizarding world was shattered and remade. The undeniable truth of the battle, of the forest's heart could not be spun or suppressed. The bodies of the fallen, both blighted creatures and the brave few from the Order who had been lost, were proof. The testimony of dozens of Aurors who had seen the horde with their own eyes was irrefutable. Cornelius Fudge's government collapsed under the weight of its own incompetence and denial. Dolores Umbridge, stripped of her authority and facing a dozen inquiries, was quietly removed from Hogwarts, her pink suits and poisonous decrees vanishing as if they had never been. A new minister, the pragmatic and grim-faced Rufus Scrimgeour, took power. He had no love for Dumbledore, but he was a realist. He had seen the reports, had seen the memories extracted from his Aurors' minds. He knew what they were facing. One of his first acts was to request a meeting. Not with Dumbledore, but with Harry. They met not in an office, but on the open grounds, near the shore of the Black Lake. Scrimgeour, flanked by two of his top Aurors, looked old and tired. His lion-like mane of hair streaked with more gray than it had been a week ago. He looked at Harry, who stood alone, clad in his simple silk tunic and leggings, his bare feet planted firmly on the earth. "The Ministry owes you a debt, Potter," Scrimgeour said, his voice gruff. It was as close to an apology as a man like him could get. "And a deep reassessment of our classifications." Harry just watched him, his gaze steady. He didn't care about Ministry classifications. "Voldemort is no longer a rumor," Scrimgeour continued, getting to the point. "He is a clear and present threat. The Ministry is preparing for war. We need allies. Powerful allies." He paused, his eyes scanning Harry's calm, wild presence. "We need you. I am here to formally recognize you not as a student, nor as a creature, but as the official liaison and protector of the Forbidden Forest, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. We will offer you resources, support." "I need nothing from you," Harry interrupted, his voice quiet but absolute. He gestured to the dark line of the trees. "My kingdom provides for its own. But we have a common enemy. My people will not stand by while he tries to burn the world. When the time comes to fight, we will be there. Not as your soldiers, but as your allies." It was a declaration of sovereignty. Scrimgeour, the head of a government that had tried to cage him, simply nodded. Accepting the terms, a new power had entered the world stage, one that did not play by the old rules. Harry's life found a new rhythm, a balance between his two worlds. He was no longer trapped between them. He was the bridge. By day, he would sometimes attend classes, not for credit, but for curiosity. He sat in on Flitwick's advanced dueling club, not to learn spells, but to study the movement and tactics of wizard combat. He spent hours in the library with Luna and Hermione, not just absorbing knowledge about fighting dark magic, but learning to read the straw NGE black symbols on the page, slowly resolving into the words Luna had taught him. By night, he was in the forest. He was not just their protector, he was their king. He held council with Megorian and the centaurs, sharing knowledge of the outside world in exchange for their ancient wisdom of the earth and stars. He oversaw the rebuilding of the Acromanula colony, guiding them, teaching them the strategic lessons he had learned, transforming them from a simple collective of hunters into a disciplined, intelligent force. He was the unwoven king, the boy who belonged to both the silk and the stone. And both realms were stronger for it. His pack in the castle grew. Ron, no longer seeing a monster, saw a fiercely loyal friend and a brilliant, if terrifying, strategist. Hermione, having given up on fitting him into a conventional box, now approached him as a magnificent, living puzzle, a new field of magic to be understood and documented. The Weasley twins treated him with the reverence U ally reserved for the creators of the Marauders map. He was an honorary marauder, the ultimate agent of chaos. But his center, his true north, was always Luna. Their romance was not one of grand public gestures or whispered sweet nothings. It was a language spoken in shared silence, in quiet understanding. It was in the way he would leave a perfect, shimmering night-blooming flower, one that only grew in the deepest parts of the forest, on her pillow. It was in the way she would save him a seat in the noisy great hall, a small island of calm in his personal storm. It was a bond forged not in spite of their strangeness, but because of it. The culmination of this quiet love came on a clear, cold night at the top of the astronomy tower. It was their place, the highest point of the stone nest, the only spot that offered a perfect, uninterrupted view of both his worlds. The lights of the castle glowed warmly below them, and the vast, dark, living sea of the forest stretched out to the horizon under a blanket of stars. They stood together at the parapet, not speaking, simply watching the moon rise. "He's afraid of you now, you know," Luna said, her voice a soft murmur on the wind. She didn't need to say who he was. Before, he wanted to kill you because of a prophecy. Now, he wants to capture you because he can't understand you. He can't categorize you, and Voldemort fears what he cannot control. Harry nodded. He knew this. Dumbledore had explained it to him. The nature of the war had shifted. Voldemort no longer saw Harry as the obstacle to his immortality. He saw him as the key to a power beyond it. He wanted to dissect Harry's soul, to learn how a being could be both man and beast, magic and nature. He wanted to understand the power that had unmade a dragon and sealed a wound in the world. The prophecy was about survival. This new war was about the very definition of magic itself. Harry turned to face Luna. The starlight caught in her silvery hair, and her wide, curious eyes reflected the endless night sky. In her, he saw not just the girl who had shown him kindness, but the anchor who had allowed him to find himself. She hadn't tried to make him human. She had simply shown him what humanity could be: brave, kind, and capable of loving even the strangest of things. He reached to his wrists, where the silk glands were hidden beneath his tunic. He focused, his hands moving in a series of intricate, weaving motions he had learned from the most skilled weavers in his colony. A single, shimmering strand of silk, glowing with a faint, internal silver light of its own magic, extruded from his wrist. He began to weave it, his fingers a blur of practiced motion. Luna watched, mesmerized. He was not just making something. It was a dance, a ritual. He finished and held it out to her. It was a small, perfect, five-pointed star, woven from a single, unbroken strand of his own magical silk. It pulsed with a soft, gentle light, a captured piece of starlight, a piece of himself. In his culture, in the silent, ancient language of the Acromanula, this was the ultimate gesture. It was more than a gift. A weaver did not give away its silk lightly. It was a promise of protection. It was a claim of kinship. It was a declaration that her thread was now woven into the web of his life, an essential, unbreakable strand. It was the spider's equivalent of a wedding ring, a crown, and a sworn oath. All in one. He didn't say, "I love you." The words were too small, too human. He simply held out the star, a silent offering of his entire, fractured, beautiful soul. Luna's eyes filled with tears. But she was smiling, a radiant, brilliant smile that outshone all the stars in the sky. She understood the gesture perfectly, not with her mind, but with her heart. She reached out and her fingers brushed his as she took the star. The touch was electric, a silent confirmation that resonated deeper than any word. "It's the most beautiful crumple-horned snarkack I've ever seen," she whispered. Her voice thick with emotion. He smiled, a true, genuine smile that reached his wild green eyes. He gently took the silk star from her and carefully, reverently, tucked it into her long, pale hair. Just behind her ear, it glowed there, a tiny, personal constellation. His mark, his promise. She reached up and touched the star, then her fingers moved to his cheek, her touch feather light. "Harry," she whispered, her voice full of a love as vast and strange as his own. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of frantic passion or teenage fumbling. It was a quiet confirmation. It was a seal on a pact. It tasted of oatcakes and moonlight and the deep, silent peace of finally being home. When they broke apart, they stood in silence, looking out at the world they were sworn to protect. Harry's gaze was clear and steady, moving from the warm, orderly lights of Hogwarts to the wild, living darkness of his forest kingdom. He was the unwoven king, the eighth son, the boy who lived. He was a creature of silk and a child of stone. He had his hive, he had his pack, and he had his queen. He held Luna's hand, the silk star glowing like a beacon in her hair. He could feel Voldemort out there, in the darkness, watching, coveting, planning. He could feel the weight of the coming war. But for the first time in his life, Harry Potter was not afraid. He knew exactly who he was. And he was ready.